The sea begins not with the horizon, but with a sound. A low, endless murmur as if the world itself is breathing in its sleep. It curls around the edges of thought, a sound older than any language, older even than the first dreamer who stood on a shoreline and wondered what lay beyond. The ocean does not rush to reveal its story. It speaks in slow syllables: foam, ripple, sigh. And if you listen long enough, you begin to suspect it remembers everything. Salt drifts in the air like an invisible memory, clinging to skin and hair, settling on lips with the faintest kiss of bitterness. It is the taste of ancient rains, of rivers that have traveled through continents before, surrendering themselves to the deep. Every drop that laps the shore has been here before, wearing a different face, part of a different wave, touching a different coast. The tide is not a thing that comes and goes. It is a breathing presence, exhaling across the sand, inhaling the fragments of the world's history back into itself. For as long as humans have lived, they have built their homes close to this breathing edge. We have cradled our children in the sound of the surf, carved harbors where ships could rest, followed the pull of the moon across water as if it were a silent guide. Fishermen have sung to the waves, lovers have walked their darkened shorelines, poets have stared into the midnight water and sworn they could hear the voices of the dead. The sea has been both parent and predator, giver and taker, and we, small in its presence, have always known to love it and to fear it in equal measure. It is easy under a quiet moon to think of the ocean as still, but beneath its mirrored surface is a place of ceaseless motion. Currents swirl in slow spirals, carrying warmth and cold across hemispheres. Shadows drift where the light cannot reach. Entire mountain ranges lie hidden beneath, their peaks cut off by miles of black water. And somewhere among them, perhaps, are the ruins of stories that should have ended long ago but did not. The sea does not destroy, it keeps. Every whisper of foam along the sand is a fragment of an older voice. Civilizations have knelt at its edge, confident in their permanence, only to vanish like footprints when the tide turns. Yet their stories do not dissolve. The ocean wraps itself around them, tucks them into the folds of its floor, and holds them there, far from the reach of sunlight. A drowned port city might still have its market square, its stone benches worn smooth by hands that have been gone for centuries. A ship, swallowed whole, might still sit upright in the sand, its masts tilted toward a sun it will never see again. Standing at the shore, you can almost hear them. Not clearly. The ocean guards its secrets too well for that. But in the way the wind changes, in the sudden hush between waves, there is an echo. The creak of a rope on a forgotten mast. The murmur of a market long emptied. The crash of something enormous, falling in water. These sounds are not really there, not in the air. They live in the mind, brought forward by the sea's rhythm as if the water is coaxing them up from the silt of memory. It is this rhythm that has drawn people to the shoreline again and again. A comfort even in its danger, a promise even in its indifference. We have learned to measure time by the tide, to let the pulse of the water guide the pace of our lives. In the heat of day, the sun lays a path across its surface, turning every ripple into molten silver. At night, the moon paints it in quiet light, the waves rolling like great slow breaths. Whether you stand there for minutes or hours, you feel it. The sense that you are part of something vast, something that has no beginning and no end. The ocean's lullaby is not soft because it is gentle. It is soft because it is constant. It does not need to raise its voice to be heard. It speaks in repetitions. The draw of water across pebbles, the fall of a wave onto sand, the retreat into stillness. Over time, the pattern folds itself into your thoughts, smoothing their edges, erasing their noise. It invites you to drift, To let go of the lines you have drawn between past and present. To remember that, in the eyes of the sea, they are the same. In this way, the ocean is not only the keeper of the world's history, it is the keeper of its forgetting. It allows stories to sink until they are no longer wounds but shapes, softened by centuries, worn into artifacts that can be turned over in the hand without pain. It changes sharp edges into curves, turns bones into sand. It asks for no witness, no record. What it holds in trust, as though it knows that not all truths are meant for the surface. And yet, there are moments, rare and fleeting, when the sea seems to give something back. A shard of pottery on the tide line, a carved stone tangled in seaweed, a bronze coin glinting in the shallows, kissed clean by the waves. These are its gifts, offered without explanation, tokens from stories we may never fully know. They remind us that for all the ocean hides, it also remembers. It cannot help but remember. If you stand at the shore at dusk, when the light folds itself into the horizon and the first stars wake in the sky, you can feel the truth of it. The air cools, the tide sighs, and for a moment the space between you and the water is filled with something unseen. The weight of ages, the pull of mystery. The ocean is not calling you in. It is not warning you away. It is simply singing the song it has always sung, a song it will sing long after every story we know has ended. That is the ocean's lullaby. It is the sound of the beginning. It is the sound of the end. And it is always the sound of what waits in between. Before the compass needle learned to trust the north, before ships dared cross waters they could not see the end of, there were maps. Not maps as we know them now. Neat grids, confident lines, measured distances, but fragile worlds sketched in uncertainty. Pieces of parchment or vellum where coastlines curled like sleeping animals, where seas were wide, blank spaces, and where the unknown was never left empty. For in those days, an empty space was not a void, it was an invitation. Early cartographers did not work from satellite images or mathematical projections. They worked from memory, rumor, and dreams. Sailors returned from voyages with tales of strange lands, some dotted with gold temples, others haunted by impossible creatures. And the mapmaker would lean over his desk, candlelight trembling in the ink, and give these words a shape. The ink itself was a kind of belief. To draw a place was to let it exist. Some lands on these old maps were real, though shifted in size and bent in proportion. Others were guesses, islands placed where they might be useful, where a ship might need to rest on a long journey. But then there were those that came from something else entirely. Whispers. Rumors passed from ship to shore, growing softer but stranger with each telling. They were not anchored by a coordinate or tied to a known current. They floated always just beyond reach, as if they belonged to the sea more than the land. If you look at the margins of a medieval map, you might see these whispers take form. A small island ringed by mountains marked only with a name that no one can translate. A continent stretching into the edge of the page labeled Terra Incognita, the unknown land. Some even showed Atlantis itself, drawn not as a ruin but as a living, breathing place. Harbors busy with ships, walls glowing with a metal no one had ever seen, streets straight and wide like the spokes of a wheel. To the mapmaker, this was not deception, it was completeness. The world felt unfinished without these stories given shape. Leaving a space blank meant admitting there was nothing there, and in those centuries people found it harder to believe in nothing than to believe in wonders. The unknown was not frightening, it was magnetic. Fog was a companion to these dreams. When a ship sailed into thick mist, the crew could no longer see the horizon, the sun, or even the water beyond the bow. In that shifting, weightless world, Distances became untrustworthy and time seemed to stretch. A voyage of hours could feel like days. A few miles could open into a whole imagined sea. When the fog cleared, the sailors' return changed. They might speak of silhouettes in the haze, the glimpse of towers, the sound of bells where no harbor was known to be. And a map maker, hearing such a story, might press his pen to parchment and sketch a shape into the blank. The maps that resulted were both tools and talismans. They guided ships through real channels and into real ports, but they also held the promise of what could be found if one sailed far enough, believed strongly enough. Some captains carried these maps not because they trusted them, but because they hoped the sea might one day deliver on the promises drawn there. And yet, for all their detail, these maps were honest in one quiet way. They admitted there was more than they could show. In the wide open spaces of parchment, in the curling edges where the land stopped and the ink ran thin, the map itself whispered, "Here we do not know." That unknowing was a living thing, not absence, but possibility. It is easy, centuries later, to smile at the dragons and sea serpents drawn in those margins. To us, they are symbols of error, the product of fear or fancy. But to the people who looked upon them by candlelight, they were reminders that the ocean was not conquered, that the edges of the world were still wild. The fog was not just weather, it was the skin between the known and the hidden. Some of those hidden places, of course, were found. Islands once believed mythical appeared on newer maps, their mountains and harbors traced in confident lines. Others vanished entirely. Perhaps never real, or perhaps real once, and then lost. And somewhere among these shifting realities lay Atlantis, drawn and redrawn, always moving, always elusive. Sometimes it was placed in the Mediterranean, other times in the far Atlantic, near the Azores, or even in the warm waters of the Caribbean. With every map maker, its shape changed as if it were following the pen. In this way, the search for Atlantis began not with ships in the water, but with ink on paper. It began in the quiet rooms where mapmakers listened to sailors' voices, weighed the truth in their eyes, and decided that even if a place could not be proven, it could still be imagined. That imagining had power. It gave sailors a reason to sail beyond sight of land. It gave kings and patrons a reason to fund impossible voyages. And it gave the sea another secret to keep. Now, when we look at those faded parchments, their ink brown with age, the fog still clings to them. We see not only the shapes of continents and the curves of coastlines, but the dreams of those who dared to draw where no one had been. In their hands, the edge of the map was never the end. It was the beginning of a story that still has no final page. Somewhere beyond that drawn edge, beyond the fog, the whisper of a place persists. A city with streets like spokes, walls that gleam in the sun, and a harbor deep enough to hold the ships of the world. Whether it was ever real, the maps believed in it. And sometimes belief is enough to carry a story farther than truth ever could. It begins, as so many stories do, with a conversation. Not in a grand hall or before a restless crowd, but in a quiet gathering of minds. Men who prized thought as much as breath, who measured the weight of words with the same care a jeweler gives to gold. The year was far from ours, the air scented with olive wood smoke, and in that shaded room sat Plato listening. The voice speaking to him was Critias, his friend, his elder, a man whose memory reached back into the stories told by his own grandfather and by that grandfather's friend. The lawgiver Solon, who had once journeyed far beyond the shores of Greece. Solon the wise, who had walked the colonnades of Egypt and sat in the presence of its priests, men whose eyes seemed older than stone, whose speech carried the slow cadence of centuries. Critias leaned forward, recalling what Solon had once been told. that in the vast expanse of the ocean, beyond the pillars of Heracles where the waters opened into a boundless plain, there had been an island. Not a small one, not a dot on a map, but a kingdom so great it could have swallowed many lands whole. Atlantis, they called it. Plato, as the story was told, listened without interruption. He could see it as Critias spoke, a city laid out like a perfect design, circles of land and water winding toward a shining heart. Bridges arched across the canals, and ships glided through them as easily as swans on a lake. The streets were wide, the air alive with the hum of commerce and music. Towering walls rose from the sea, their surfaces gleaming with a strange reddish metal, or a calcum, that caught the sun like fire and gold entwined. The Atlanteans, so the priests had said, were children of gods and men. From their divine father Poseidon they inherited the strength of the ocean and the will to rule. From their mortal mother they inherited the hungers and flaws of humankind. For a time the gods' gift and man's ambition moved in harmony. They built temples that glittered like dawn, filled their markets with goods from distant shores, and mastered arts both practical and profound. Their navy was unmatched, their armies vast, their influence stretched across lands and seas. But as Critias's voice deepened, the mood in the room shifted. For the priests had told Solon that wealth and power are tides, and tides always turn. In the hearts of the Atlanteans the divine faded and the mortal swelled. Greed replaced wisdom. Desire outpaced restraint. Where once their eyes had turned to the horizon in curiosity, now they turned in conquest. The wide harbors that had welcomed the world became the mouths of warships, and their rule over distant lands grew heavier, more cruel. It was then, said the priests, that the gods looked upon Atlantis with sorrow. Poseidon's children had strayed too far from the balance he had set for them. The island that had been a jewel of the world had become a shadow over it. And so, judgment was made, not in anger, but in the cold inevitability with which the sea reclaims the shore. Plato heard of the night it happened, the night the sky darkened with storms. Winds tore across the harbors, waves rose higher than the tallest towers, and the ground itself trembled as if the world's bones were breaking. The island shuddered, cracked, and began to sink. In a single day and night of misfortune, as the priests told it, Atlantis was gone. Its streets, its temples, its people, all swallowed by the sea, leaving only the restless waters where it had stood. When Critias finished, silence settled over the room. Not the silence of disbelief, but the silence of men who feel the weight of a story pressing against the edges of the present. Plato did not rush to speak. He turned the tale over in his mind, examining its shapes and shadows. He saw in it not only the rise and fall of a single city, but the rhythm that beats through all human history. The climb toward greatness, the tipping into excess, the fall that follows. Later, when he wrote of Atlantis, he did so not as a sailor or a map-maker, but as a philosopher. In his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, he set the scene, captured the words, and gave them a frame in which they could endure. He did not demand that the reader believe, nor did he suggest the story was mere invention. He left it poised in that delicate space between truth and parable, where history and myth breathe the same air. To read those words now is to sit once more in that shaded room, to feel the glow of the fire and the slow drift of smoke, to hear Critias's voice carrying the memory of Solon, the memory of the priests, the memory of a city that may have been. The sound is low, steady, and strangely timeless, like the ocean itself, telling a story it has told 1,000 times before to anyone willing to listen. And in that telling, Atlantis does not sink. It waits. Long before a keel cut the waters of an uncharted sea, the mind had already traveled there. It is one of the oldest traits in us, to imagine a place before we have touched it, to give shape to a coastline we have never seen, to feel the air of a land that may not exist. In the darkness before dawn, on decks slick with salt spray, sailors spoke of islands that shimmered just beyond the reach of sight. And though they could not point to them on any chart, they spoke with the quiet certainty of those who have felt a place rather than measured it. This is the power of imagined geography. It does not require evidence, only longing. It begins with a whisper, a half-remembered tale passed along a dock, a strange bird seen far from any known shore, a driftwood log carrying seeds from nowhere familiar. The mind takes these fragments and builds upon them. An island rises in the mind's eye, its shores precise, its hills shaped by personal hunger. To the pearl diver, it is a place of endless shells. To the merchant, a harbor rich with trade. To the weary, a gentle shore where storms never reach. Explorers especially have lived on the strength of such visions. Maps can tell them where the world has been measured, but the unmeasured places call louder. They imagine their names written into the folds of parchment, turning the blank into the known. Many have sailed for months toward a place they could not prove, driven less by the thought of what they would find than by the terror of what it would mean if there were nothing there at all. For scholars, the pull is different. To them, belief is a fragile thing, weighed down by the need for records and measures. A place without evidence is a place that lives only in the air. They point to the shifting nature of such rumors, how an island's location changes from one account to the next, how the details bend to fit the teller's mood. They remind us that the sea is a master of illusion. Clouds that gather into the shapes of mountains, currents that carry floating debris far from its source. Mirages that turn the horizon into a painted lie. And yet even the most disciplined scholar cannot completely escape the spell. To deny outright is to stand on the shore, looking into the fog and declare with certainty that there is nothing beyond it. But the fog resists such certainty. It holds shapes. It invites the thought, perhaps. And once the thought takes root, it grows in secret. Atlantis belongs to this borderland between doubt and desire. For every geographer who dismisses it as myth, there is an explorer ready to set sail for its imagined harbors. Its very elusiveness feeds both camps. If it could be found, the story would end. But because it cannot be proven or disproven, it lives, and living it draws people toward it. History is crowded with places once believed imaginary that turned out to be real. The island of Thule, once a phantom on the maps of ancient mariners, now recognized as part of Iceland's story. The city of Troy, dismissed as pure legend until a stubborn archaeologist's spade found its stones. Such discoveries keep the door open for belief in the unverified. They remind us that sometimes the mind's eye is a better guide than the compass. But for every Troy, there is a high Brazil, an island said to appear only once every 7 years off the coast of Ireland, drawn on maps for centuries yet never reached. There is a St. Brendan's Isle, a speck that shifted across charts like a drifting dream, refusing to anchor itself in any truth. These are places that live only in stories, yet have left a deeper mark on human imagination than many real lands. Perhaps this is the secret. A place that cannot be reached, cannot be ruined. In the mind's eye, it remains perfect, untouched by the erosion of reality. No famine can wither its fields, no war can scar its streets. It exists in a perpetual golden hour, the light always falling just so, the air always scented with possibility. Such perfection may not withstand the weight of reality, but it can endure forever in thought. The longing for such places says as much about us as it does about the sea. We are a species of seekers, restless even when the land beneath us is fertile, the sky above us calm. We are drawn to the horizon not because we lack here, but because there exists. The imagined island becomes a mirror for our hopes, a place where we can be braver, wiser, kinder, richer than we are now. Whether it lies a day's sail or a lifetime away hardly matters. Its distance is part of its charm. And yet doubt is always there, leaning against the rail. It asks the uncomfortable question, is the chase itself the treasure? If the land in the mind's eye were suddenly real, if its sands were underfoot, its air in our lungs, would the spell break? Would the dream dissolve into the simple fact of another shore? Some explorers admit in quiet moments that perhaps it would. That perhaps what they are chasing is not the place, but the feeling of moving toward it. For Atlantis, that feeling has lasted millennia. Each telling reshapes it. Each generation moves it on the map. Sometimes it is a sunlit empire in the Mediterranean. Sometimes a jewel in the Caribbean. Sometimes a kingdom swallowed by Antarctic ice. It exists where we most want it to exist, in the exact shape we need it to take. And so the psychological map remains unrolled. On it, the known world is edged with wonders, mountains that touch the sky, forests where the trees sing, islands where cities gleam beneath the sun. And beyond them always something more, a place half hidden by fog, waiting for the moment someone will dare to believe it into being. Spread a map from centuries past across a table, and it becomes a window, not just to the world as it was thought to be, but to the minds that imagined it. Ink lines wander like the paths of rivers, coastlines bulge or shrink, and oceans swell wider than the truth. Yet between the ports and known harbors, there are places that exist more in the realm of longing than measurement. They are shaded islands, sketched continents, names that seem to hum with possibility. Atlantis is not alone in this cartographic twilight. Other lands, Lemuria, Mu, Antillia, High Brazil, have drifted across ancient maps like phantoms. They share a strange kinship, each born from fragments of observation, each woven together by the invisible thread of human imagination. Lemuria began as a scientific puzzle in the 19th century. Zoologists, puzzled by the spread of certain species across distant shores, theorized that a vast landmass must once have bridged the Indian Ocean. In the hands of scientists, it was first a practical explanation. In the hands of dreamers, it became a lost world. Soon maps appeared showing a great continent stretching between Madagascar and India, lush and teeming with life. In these visions, Lemuria was not just land. It was an Eden, a cradle of forgotten civilizations whose temples now sleep beneath the waves. Mu, by contrast, surfaced in the Pacific, whispered into existence through mistranslated tablets and the ambitions of explorers hungry for mystery. Said to have been a sprawling continent in the heart of the Pacific Ocean, Mu was described as the origin of all great cultures, its people sailing in every direction before a sudden cataclysm swallowed their homeland. The maps that embraced Mu showed it as immense, a bridge between worlds, anchoring human history to a single sunken route. To the modern mind, such lands are easy to dismiss. We have satellites that can peer into the ocean's depths, measuring mountains and valleys invisible to the naked eye. No great lost continents appear on their screens. Lemuria, in the geological sense, never was. Mu, in the anthropological sense, cannot be. And yet their absence from reality does not erase their presence in us. For every map that marks them, there is a human hand that drew the line, a human mind that felt compelled to fill the blank. These imagined continents are not proof of ignorance, but of a restless need, a need to believe that the world holds more than it shows. The known is a comfort, the unknown, a promise. Ancient maps embraced that promise openly. They were less concerned with separating truth from myth than with weaving them together into a coherent whole. A coastline could end in certainty and continue in speculation. the ink flowing without pause. In this, the myth and the map were not enemies. They were partners. A sailor setting out with such a chart knew that some harbors would greet him and others would vanish like smoke. Both were part of the journey. Atlantis fits naturally into this lineage. It is drawn and redrawn not because we expect to find it exactly as Plato described, but because its absence leaves a hollow place in the imagination. Like Lemuria and Mu, it acts as a kind of mirror. We project onto it the things we most long for: wisdom, wealth, harmony, and the things we most fear: pride, greed, destruction. It is at once a utopia and a warning, its location shifting to follow the questions of the age. Maps, in their quiet way, are as much about time as they are about space. A myth that survives long enough earns its own coordinates. Even as science redraws the coastlines and measures the depths, the ghost of the old shapes remains. Sailors of the mind still see them even when the water is empty. And so between myth and map, there is a narrow channel. Wide enough to hold the unproven, deep enough to keep it safe. The cartographers of old sailed it without shame, charting both what they had touched and what they had only heard. They knew that a world too fully known can feel smaller, less alive. To leave room for a Lemuria, a Mu, and Atlantis was to admit that the horizon should never be the end of the story. Perhaps that is the truest function of these lost lands, not to be found, but to keep us searching. They remind us that there are still blank spaces, if not on the maps, then in the heart. And in those spaces, continents can still rise, ringed with mountains, rich with rivers, waiting for the moment someone dares to draw them again. Atlantis has never stayed in one place. From the moment Plato's words left his scroll, its coordinates have drifted, carried on the currents of curiosity and conviction. One century anchors it in the familiar waters of the Mediterranean. Another sends it westward, far across the Atlantic, to islands touched by warm trade winds. It moves because the map of belief is not bound by latitude or longitude. It follows the needs of those who draw it. In the earliest retellings, Atlantis lay just beyond the Pillars of Heracles, a stone's throw from the known world. Here, seekers searched among the Greek islands, in the ruins of Crete, in the volcanic crescent of Santorini. The Aegean, with its history of earthquakes and tsunamis, seemed a fitting grave. Its shattered shorelines spoke in the same language as Plato's flood. But as voyages lengthened and the edges of the map pushed outward, so too did Atlantis. Renaissance thinkers, armed with new charts and old ambition, began to see the legend reflected in the far Atlantic. The Azores, rising from deep waters in perfect arcs, became likely candidates. To the sailors who glimpsed them through fog, their green slopes and volcanic cliffs looked like fragments of a continent torn apart. By the time the New World entered European imagination, Atlantis had already crossed the ocean in thought. The Caribbean, with its turquoise shallows and chain of islands, seemed to whisper of a sunken empire. Some placed it in the Bahamas, pointing to the mysterious Bimini Road, a line of submerged stones that looked to eager eyes like the work of ancient hands. Others imagined it farther south, in the jungled coasts of Central America, linking it to Mayan and Aztec grandeur. In the 20th century, theories multiplied like scattered islands. Some shifted the legend to the icy fringe of Antarctica, proposing that the continent we know now was once warm, its mountains crowned with temples before a sudden tilt buried it under glaciers. Others traced it to the Black Sea, to Morocco's Atlantic coast, to even the depths near Japan. Each theory came with a conviction as solid as stone, and each was challenged by another that was just as certain. Why does it move so easily? Perhaps because Atlantis is not only a place we seek, but a reflection of the one who seeks it. The scholar finds it where history leaves a gap in the record. The adventurer finds it where the water runs deepest and the risk feels sharp. The dreamer finds it where the light falls just so, turning the sea to molten gold. Atlantis changes coordinates because we change, our questions, our fears, our hopes. In this way, the search is as much inward as outward. Each new location says something about the generation that placed it there, its hungers, its boundaries, its idea of paradise and ruin. The Mediterranean version speaks of intimacy, of a loss close to home. The Atlantic version speaks of exploration, of the thrill of distance. The Caribbean version speaks of warmth and abundance, of civilizations thriving in sunlit waters. The Antarctic version speaks of the allure of the unreachable, the pure, the sealed away. If it were ever proven, if divers brought back irrefutable stones and artifacts from a single fixed spot, something in the legend would settle, and perhaps diminish. Part of Atlantis's endurance comes from its refusal to be anchored. Its shifting coordinates let it live in many places at once, in many minds at once. It belongs equally to the chart and to the dream. So the lines on the map keep changing. They trace circles around islands, stretch across oceans, dive into trenches. They are redrawn with every telling, every discovery, every quiet evening when someone stands by the water and wonders if just beyond the horizon, a city waits. Not where we think it is, but exactly where we need it to be. When most people hear the word treasure, they picture gold, the sun glinting off stacked coins, jeweled crowns resting on velvet, ornate goblets heavy with silver and gems. It is an image as old as the first story told around a fire, and as enduring as the sparkle in a prospector's eye. But the treasure spoken of in the legend of Atlantis has always felt different. It is rarely described in glittering inventories, never reduced to the weight of bullion or the count of pearls. Instead, it seems to live in a softer light, the kind that filters through water and memory, illuminating not objects but ideas. Plato's account hints at wealth, yes, metals, fine buildings, abundance beyond measure. But woven through his words is something richer, a vision of a society that thrived not only in resources but in harmony. For a time, the Atlanteans seemed to possess a balance the rest of the world could only imagine, a civilization where knowledge, craftsmanship, and governance moved together like the three notes of a perfect chord. This perhaps was the true treasure. It was not gold, but the ability to shape stone so that it stood for centuries without crumbling. Not gems, but a mastery of agriculture that turned even the driest ground into fertile plains. Not fleets heavy with plunder, but ships built to withstand tempests, their sails woven with the precision of a poet's verse. And above all, it was an understanding of themselves, of the rhythms of the earth, of how to live with the gifts of the sea without draining them dry. We can imagine a library at the heart of that city, its walls open to the sea breeze, its shelves holding scrolls that spoke of medicine far beyond the reach of the age, of mathematics that could chart the stars with unerring accuracy, of histories written with the patience of centuries rather than the haste of a single lifetime. Perhaps their architects had learned to marry beauty and strength so completely that no building was only shelter and no statue was only art. Each was a union of form and function, a conversation between the maker and the land. Technology in such a world would not have been a chain binding them to conquest, but a tool for sustaining the delicate balance they enjoyed. If the accounts of their canals and harbors hold any truth, then the Atlanteans had mastered water in ways still envied by engineers today. Their cities were said to float between rings of land and sea, a design both defensive and beautiful, as though they had learned early that the two need not be in conflict. Yet, like all treasures, this harmony was fragile. Wealth can survive on its own for a time, but the kind of treasure Atlantis may have held, The knowledge of how to live in that balance requires constant care. It is not a thing you can lock in a chest. It must be renewed each day, guarded not by soldiers but by the will of the people. When pride swelled and appetite sharpened, that treasure would have been the first to dull. It's worth asking, if Atlantis were to rise tomorrow whole and unbroken, what would we search for first? Would we comb its streets for coins and artifacts to sell? Or would we listen for the quieter things? The methods in their farming, the patterns in their urban planning, the rituals that kept greed at bay. In our time, such treasures feel even rarer than gold. We live in an age of abundance in many parts of the world, yet that abundance often brings imbalance rather than peace. We reach for more wealth, more land, more power, without the patient harmony that makes more sustainable. Atlantis, whether real or imagined, offers a vision of what it might mean to value the invisible above the visible. The stories of its riches have survived precisely because they are hard to measure. A bar of gold can be weighed, a way of life cannot. And so it lingers like a fragrance you can almost name but never quite capture. In the quiet, when the world around us is stilled, we can imagine walking through its avenues, not dazzled by jewels but by the way everything seems to fit. The gardens bloom without being overworked. The air is clean, the water sweet. People move with a sense of purpose, yet without the restless hunger that drives so much of human history. Perhaps this was the Atlanteans' greatest inheritance, the understanding that the rarest treasure is not what you take from the world, but what you leave in it. A harvest that can be repeated without exhaustion. A building that grows more beautiful with age. A piece that can be passed from one generation to the next, without being chipped away by ambition. Such treasures are easy to overlook because they do not flash in the sunlight. They are quiet, like the deep current beneath the waves, invisible at the surface, yet powerful enough to shape entire coastlines. And perhaps this is why they are so easily lost. When trouble comes, when storms rise, it is the gold and the grain we try to save first. The balance, the wisdom, the subtle art of living well. These we let slip through our fingers, telling ourselves we can rebuild them later. But some things cannot be rebuilt once they are gone. If Atlantis did fall as Plato described, it may have taken with it not only wealth but a way of being that the world has not known since. That is why the legend endures, because it speaks to a hunger we still feel, a recognition that true treasure is not counted in coins but in the things that make coins unnecessary. In the end, the story of Atlantis is not only about a city swallowed by the sea. It is about what we choose to prize. Gold is simple. It asks only to be found. But harmony, wisdom, and the craft of living in balance, these are treasures that must be earned, guarded, and renewed. And if we can imagine Atlantis having held them, perhaps we can imagine ourselves holding them again. Even if the city never rises from the waves, its greatest treasure may yet be within our reach, if we learn to value it as much as those long-vanished Atlanteans once did. In the oldest tellings of Atlantis, the city did not merely shine in the sun. It glowed, as though lit from within. Plato wrote of a strange metal that lined its temples, sheathed its walls, and crowned its towers. Orichalcum. Neither pure gold nor common bronze, it was said to be second only to gold in value, a treasure of the earth as rare as the harmony the Atlanteans once kept. The name itself hums with mystery, carrying the taste of fire and ore, the clang of hammer on anvil, the shimmer of something almost impossible. In imagination, orichalcum has always lived between worlds. Gold is familiar, iron is practical, but orichalcum feels like a secret, a material born from the meeting of human craft and some deeper magic of the earth. Ancient descriptions speak of its warm reddish hue, a surface that seemed to hold the light rather than merely reflect it. In the courtyards of Atlantis, its glow would have caught the dawn and the dusk alike, turning the city into a living ember at the edge of the sea. No ancient writer left a formula for its making, but theories have grown in the long centuries since. Some imagine it as a kind of perfected bronze alloyed with copper, gold, and other rare elements. Others suggest it was a naturally occurring ore unique to the island's heart, its veins running like lifeblood through the bedrock. Whatever its origin, the legends agree that it was more than a material. It was a symbol. To the Atlanteans, orichalcum was the skin of their sacred places. The great temple of Poseidon, it was said, shone with the metal's warm fire so that even from far out at sea, sailors could see the city gleaming against the horizon. Its presence marked what was most valued, most worthy of reverence. Not the coins in the market, but the structures and spaces that bound the people together. In this way, orichalcum's meaning reaches beyond metallurgy. It stands for the height of human skill, the ability to take what the earth offers and shape it into something enduring. It also stands for pride, for what happens when beauty and rarity become the measure of worth. As Atlantis grew rich, orichalcum became more than sacred adornment. It became a sign of power, a way to display greatness in a language no rival could ignore. And then, like the city itself, it was gone. For centuries, orichalcum lived only in words, a relic of a vanished place. No known mine yielded it, no surviving artifact could be named with certainty. Skeptics called it another flourish in Plato's fable, a poet's invention to gild an already radiant vision. But in recent years, the sea has begun to give up small offerings, fragments that make the old stories flicker with new light. In 2015, off the coast of Sicily, divers exploring a wreck from the 6th century BCE found something remarkable. Dozens of ingots, each with a reddish gold sheen, each unlike common bronze. Analysis suggested a blend of copper, zinc, and traces of nickel, lead, and iron. Not gold, not brass, but something that seemed to echo ancient descriptions of orichalcum. The ship, likely bound for a port in southern Italy, had sunk in shallow water before delivering its cargo. No one can say whether the metal truly came from the Atlantis of legend, but its presence stirred imaginations worldwide. Other finds have followed, each fragment sparking debate. Some dismiss them as early brass, a simple alloy known to ancient smiths. Others point to the rarity of such composition in known artifacts, arguing that these pieces might be the survivors of a once more widespread trade, a trade that could connect, however loosely, to the world Plato described. In truth, whether orichalcum can be proven or not matters less than what it represents. In the story of Atlantis, it is the perfect metal for a perfect city, luminous, strong, precious, yet not as common as gold. Its glow is the glow of ambition, of achievement, of beauty so complete it begins to border on hubris. And like the city, it teaches the same quiet lesson, that even the most radiant things can be lost. If you imagine walking through Atlantis in its height, you might picture streets paved in smooth stone, markets fragrant with spice, fountains playing in the sunlight. But it is the orichalcum that would catch your breath, the way it lines the pillars of the temple, the way it rims the great harbor gates, the way it turns the city's heart into a furnace of reflected dawn. You could not help but feel you were standing in a place that had mastered both the earth's raw gifts and the art of turning them into symbols. Perhaps that is why the idea of orichalcum still glows in our minds. It is more than a lost metal. It is a reminder of how beauty and meaning can be fused together, how the rarest things are often those that carry both weight and light. Whether it lies in the silt of the Mediterranean, in the pages of myth, or in the alloys of modern forges, its story remains bound to Atlantis, a shimmer just beyond certainty, a glow we can still see when the sun sinks low and the sea turns to fire. Imagine descending through the blue, deeper and deeper until the last thread of sunlight breaks apart above you. The water cools, the world slows, and sound becomes a muted thrum. Then out of the dimness, shapes begin to form. Pillars, arches, the edges of a roof half buried in sand. And within those walls, something stranger still. Rows upon rows of slabs, each carved with the delicate patience of a human hand. It is a library, not of paper and ink, but of stone, a place where words were not merely written but engraved to outlast storms, fire, and time itself. These are the imagined archives of Atlantis, a vault of memory designed to endure even when the city above was gone. Each tablet is the size of a man's chest, its surface scored with lines of an ancient script no one alive can read. The carvings are deep, as if their makers knew the sea might one day roll over them, scouring their edges with sand and salt. The language is silent now, but you can almost feel the weight of what it holds. Maps of coastlines that no longer exist. Accounts of rulers whose names have never been spoken in our age. The records of trades and treaties between cities that may have vanished before our own histories began. Above in the living world, books decay and fade. Ink bleeds, pages crumble, fire devours. But here on the ocean floor, the words have been kept in a kind of suspended stillness. They do not fade, though they are touched by shadows. They do not burn, though the earth above them may have changed 1,000 times. The only thief here is the slow drift of the sea, which buries and uncovers them in its own rhythm. To imagine such a library is to feel the tension between two kinds of silence. There is the silence of the ocean, vast, enveloping, indifferent, and the silence of words waiting to be read. One is the absence of sound, the other the presence of meaning held just out of reach. Together they make the place feel alive, even though no voice has echoed here for millennia. Perhaps in those final days before the island sank, the Atlanteans knew what was coming. Perhaps the scribes worked by torchlight in great halls, hurriedly copying their histories, their philosophies, their laws onto slabs of stone, not for their own survival, but for the survival of their memory. In this imagining, the last act of Atlantis was not to save its wealth or its walls, but to save its words. The choice to use stone says something about what they valued. They could have cast their knowledge in metals, but metals tarnish and tempt. They could have trusted memory, but memory fades and bends. Stone asks for nothing. It simply remains. In this way, the Atlanteans might have ensured that their voices, though muted, would still be heard by anyone who could one day find the key. Yet here is the most haunting part. Even if such an archive were found, its script deciphered, its contents revealed, would we truly understand it? Knowledge is not only in the words, but in the mind that shapes them. Without the context of the world they lived in, their truths might seem as strange to us as our own would to them. We might read the story of a king and mistake him for a god. We might trace the diagram of a device and never guess its purpose. The gap between knowing and understanding would remain as wide as the ocean above. Still, the idea of it calls to us, perhaps because it suggests that somewhere beneath the waves the answers to our oldest questions already exist, carved in neat lines, waiting. What was Atlantis truly like? How did they rise so high? Why did they fall? In the stone library, those answers might be no more than an arm's length apart, and yet there is a strange comfort in the fact that the sea keeps them. The ocean floor does not hurry. It has no interest in revealing its treasures all at once. The tablets may lie undisturbed for centuries more, guarded by the silence that has become their companion. In the mind's eye, the scene fades back into shadow. The rows of stone recede, the pillars dissolve into the blue, and the surface light calls you upward again. But even as you rise, you carry with you the image of that library. The weight of it, the patience of it, the promise that somewhere in the dark, the words of a vanished world still wait to be read. The ocean has its own language, a slow, unhurried tongue spoken in the movement of water. It is not a language you can hear in the air, though it hums beneath every wave. It is carried in the pull of a tide, the sway of kelp forests, the drift of sand across the seafloor. For centuries, we could only guess at its grammar, glimpsing a fragment in the curl of foam or the sudden change in a swell. But in time, science found a way to lean closer, to listen with instruments rather than ears, and to let the ocean speak for itself. Oceanography is the patient act of translation. It begins at the surface, where the sun warms the water in broad, shimmering sheets. Warm water is lighter, rising above the cold, dense layers below. Between them lies the thermocline, a boundary as invisible as it is profound, separating worlds of temperature and life. Currents thread their way along these layers like sentences shaped by winds, the turning of the earth, and the deep geography of the ocean floor. Geology joins the conversation from below. The seabed is not a flat and silent plain, but a world of mountains, valleys, ridges, and canyons. Mid-ocean ridges snake across the globe like the spines of sleeping giants, where molten rock seeps up to form new crust. Trenches dive miles deep, cutting into the earth with a darkness so complete that even sound moves differently there. Every slope, every ridge, every fracture in the crust changes the path of the water above, like punctuation guiding the flow of a sentence. To map this unseen world, scientists send out ships that trail long, listening lines behind them. Sonar pulses travel down, strike the seabed, and return, each echo carrying a piece of the story. A shallow return is a comma, a pause in the descent. A long silence is a chasm. Over time, these echoes knit themselves into maps, ghostly reliefs of a landscape no human has walked, yet which shapes the face of the oceans we know. Currents themselves can be read in similar ways. Instruments anchored to the seafloor feel the passing of water like the brush of a hand, recording its direction, speed, and temperature. Satellite altimeters orbiting high above measure the slightest bulges and dips in the ocean's surface, the fingerprints of currents far below. Together, these tools reveal a living circulation, warm rivers flowing invisibly across the globe, cold streams sinking into the depths, whirlpools the size of countries spinning slowly in place. In these patterns, science seeks not only to understand the ocean as it is, but as it has been. Sediment cores, narrow cylinders drawn up from the seabed, hold a record of centuries. Layer upon layer of silt, shell, and dust settles from above, trapping the history of climate, volcanic ash, even traces of human activity. By reading these layers, geologists can trace the ebb and flow of ice ages, the shifts of tectonic plates, and the sudden violence of tsunamis. And here, between the precise measurements and the careful charts, the legend of Atlantis quietly drifts. A sudden collapse of land into the sea leaves its mark not only on memory, but in the pattern of the seabed, in the grain of sediment carried far from shore. If an island the size of a kingdom once stood where now there is only deep water, the language of currents and the handwriting of geology might still tell its name, if we learn how to listen for it. The listening is slow work. There is no rush in the ocean's speech, no impatient revealing of secrets. A current may take years to complete its loop, a ridge centuries to rise. Even the fastest science must learn the patience of tides. Each new measurement adds a word, a phrase, a line to the great unending story the sea tells. Yet there is beauty in that patience. Imagine standing on the deck of a research vessel at dawn, the horizon a pale gold seam between sea and sky. Below you, instruments hum softly, speaking to the deep. The water flows past the hull, bearing with it grains of sand from deserts thousands of miles away. The echo of storms long faded, the warmth of a sun that touched it months before. You cannot see the patterns it follows, but they are there, weaving the continents together, carrying life and memory in their silent currents. In this way, oceanography and geology do more than measure. They reveal the invisible threads binding the world, the same threads that may have carried the story of Atlantis across millennia. They teach us that the sea is not chaos, but an order we are only beginning to translate. A language spoken in depths and distances, in warmth and cold, in the quiet turning of the earth itself. And somewhere in that language, perhaps, is the word for a city that once stood proud and vanished beneath the waves. A word the currents have been repeating softly, for thousands of years, waiting for us to finally understand. The earth moves more often than we realize. Most of the time, its shifting is too slow to notice, plates gliding past one another at the pace our fingernails grow, continents drifting like vast, silent rafts. But sometimes the motion is sudden, violent, and unforgettable. In a single heartbeat, land can rise or fall, coasts can redraw themselves, and cities can vanish. For those who imagine Atlantis, such moments offer a glimpse of how a whole island kingdom might be lost. Not as a slow fading, but as a shock, a tearing, a collapse that turns stone to rubble and rubble to sand. Plato's account speaks of one day and night of misfortune, a timescale that fits not the erosion of centuries, but the brutal swiftness of an earthquake or volcanic eruption. We do not have to imagine the terror of such events entirely. History has given us its echoes. In 1902, on the Caribbean island of Martinique, the city of Saint-Pierre was known as the Paris of the West Indies, a bustling port of bright markets, cobbled streets, and a harbor crowded with ships. Then, in early May, the volcano Mount Pelée awoke. The people, reassured by officials that there was no danger, stayed. On May 8th, the mountain tore itself open. A cloud of superheated ash and gas raced down its slopes, moving faster than a hurricane wind. In less than a minute, Saint-Pierre was gone. Out of a population of 28,000, only 2 survived. Half a world away, in 1883, the island of Krakatoa in Indonesia erupted with such force that it was heard nearly 2,000 miles away. Entire sections of the island collapsed into the sea, displacing so much water that tsunamis rose over 100 feet high, sweeping across coastlines and drowning villages in moments. In the aftermath, where land had been, there was only open water. Even earthquakes without volcanic fire can rewrite geography in an instant. In 1755, on All Saints' Day, the city of Lisbon was struck by a quake so massive that it was felt in France, Italy, and North Africa. The ground shook for 6 minutes, toppling buildings and tearing fissures into the streets. Then came the sea. 3 waves, each larger than the last, surged into the city's heart, sweeping away thousands who had fled there for safety. Fires followed, burning for days. In all, as many as 50,000 lives were lost. These are tragedies on a human scale, yet they also reveal the planet's deeper mechanics. Earthquakes are born in the grinding of tectonic plates, great slabs of the Earth's crust that float atop molten rock. When they catch and lock against each other, stress builds invisibly over decades or centuries. When that stress finally breaks, the plates lurch, sending tremors racing through the ground. If the rupture is under the sea, the sudden shift can push aside billions of tons of water. creating tsunamis that carry the disaster far beyond the quake's epicenter. Volcanoes, too, are tied to this restless crust. Some rise slowly over millennia, but others hide their power until the moment of release. A single eruption can collapse the cone of a mountain, flooding the surrounding sea with debris. The weight of that collapse can trigger quakes and tsunamis in turn, a chain of destruction capable of erasing an island from sight. It's not hard, standing in the shadow of such histories, to see how Atlantis could fit into this pattern. An island city built near the meeting point of tectonic plates would have enjoyed the fertile soils, the rich fishing grounds, the trade routes such locations often bring. But it would also have lived under a quiet threat. Perhaps there were warnings, tremors underfoot, smoke from a mountain's peak, strange tides. But as in St. Pierre, reassurance may have outweighed fear. Life would have gone on until the morning it didn't. And yet, these same disasters that destroy also preserve. Beneath the ash of Mount Vesuvius, the Roman city of Pompeii lay hidden for nearly 1,700 years, its streets, frescoes, and even loaves of bread frozen in time. In a similar way, if Atlantis sank in a single cataclysm, much of it could still lie intact beneath the sediment, the ocean's own seal of preservation. Science now listens for the Earth's shifting in ways the ancients could not. Networks of seismographs detect tremors from pole to pole. Satellites track the slightest swell of a volcano's flanks. Underwater microphones record the low rumbles of quakes across the seafloor. Each measurement adds to our understanding, yet each also reminds us that the forces capable of swallowing a city whole are still very much alive. When we hear these modern readings, a deep rumble beneath the Pacific, a sudden jolt along the Mediterranean ridge, we are in a way hearing the same voice that may once have spoken beneath Atlantis. The same grinding, the same release, the same transformation from solid ground to empty sea. And so, when Plato's tale speaks of a single night of ruin, it is not only the language of myth, it is also the language of memory. Memory carried forward in the earth itself, in the shifting of its bones, in the tremor that still runs beneath our feet. There is a particular kind of silence that scientists know well. It is not the hush of an empty room, nor the calm of a windless sea. It is the quiet that follows when the instruments return their readings, and those readings say nothing. No anomaly, no trace, no hidden line in the map that might be the wall of a sunken city. Just the steady, neutral voice of the ocean giving away none of its secrets. For those searching for Atlantis, this silence can be the loudest answer of all. The tools of modern oceanography are extraordinary. Multi-beam sonar that paints the seabed in color-coded relief, satellite altimetry that senses the faint bulge of an undersea mountain, sediment cores that hold centuries of environmental history in thin layers of mud. And yet, despite their reach, they sometimes return only blankness. Not empty ocean, but an ocean without the shapes we hope to find. This is the frustration. To peer into the deep with instruments capable of seeing what no human eye could, and to be met not with confirmation nor with contradiction, but with the absence of either. It is like listening for a heartbeat in the dark and hearing only your own. The temptation is to read meaning into that absence, to say that the nothing is proof that nothing is there. But in truth, the ocean's silence is never proof of absence. It is only the space between questions and answers. There are practical reasons for this quiet. Sediment drifts endlessly across the seafloor, softening sharp lines, burying structures beneath layers of silt. Coral grows over stone, reshaping it into unfamiliar forms. In deep trenches, pressure crushes and erodes, erasing details until even the deliberate work of human hands becomes indistinguishable from the work of time. The deeper we look, the more the sea reminds us that it has had millennia to hide what it wishes to keep. Yet there is also a more humbling truth. The instruments, for all their precision, are only as revealing as the questions we ask of them. They measure what we tell them to measure. If Atlantis lies outside the zones we've mapped, or if its remains are unlike anything we expect to see, then the silence is not the ocean's alone. It is partly ours. In this way, the absence of data becomes its own kind of lesson. It reminds us that mystery is not an error to be corrected, but a reality to be respected. Science thrives on curiosity, but it also requires patience. The answers may not come on the first expedition or the 10th or in our lifetime at all. And still the search continues, not only because we hope to find, but because the act of searching sharpens our understanding of everything else we encounter along the way. There is a strange beauty in this humility. A sonar scan that shows nothing is still a map of the world as it is, in that moment, in that place. A core sample with no sign of catastrophe still holds the slow story of the sea's breathing, its currents, its seasons, its steady layering of time. Even silence has shape if you are willing to look closely enough. For the seeker of Atlantis, that shape may yet change. One day, the same instruments that now return blank fields could sweep across a formation that does not belong, a curve too regular, a stone too smooth, a pattern too precise to be chance. Until then, the silence stands between us and certainty. And perhaps in its own way, that is fitting. A city that has lived this long in myth deserves a little longer in mystery. The ocean will speak when it chooses. And when it does, the first thing we may hear is how little we truly knew. There is a music to the ocean, though it does not drift to us on the air. It moves through water, through pressure, through the invisible corridors between waves. To hear it, you cannot simply open your ears. You must learn to speak in pulses and echoes in the language of sonar. When a sonar ping is sent into the deep, it is like striking the first note of a song and waiting for the harmony to return. The sound travels down through the layers, warm surface water, cooler depths, and finally into the vast darkness where no light has ever been. It strikes what lies there, rock, sand, coral, metal, and comes back changed. The tone shifts, the length of its journey lengthens or shortens. In that change is information, the pitch and rhythm of the ocean's hidden shape. Scientists speak of sonar in terms of frequencies, returns, and bathymetric profiles. But standing on the deck of a vessel, you feel it as something else entirely, a conversation between the ship and the sea. Every ping is a question. What are you holding? What lies beneath? And every echo is an answer, though never a complete one. The ocean replies in hints, in softened syllables, as though reluctant to be fully understood. Early sonar was crude, like the first instruments of any orchestra. In the days after World War I, it could tell only that something was there, a submarine, a shoal, a seamount, without detail. But as technology refined, so did the song. Today, multi-beam sonar can sweep wide fans of sound across the seabed, measuring the distance to thousands of points at once. The results appear as colored maps, each shade marking a depth, each contour a phrase in the ocean's ongoing melody. When those maps form on the screens in the ship's control room, they are not the flat blue of an atlas. They are textured landscapes, mountains rising from the abyss, canyons plunging deeper than the Grand Canyon, plateaus where the water stills in its slow dance. To the trained eye, they can also reveal shapes that whisper of human hands. Lines too straight, corners too sharp, symmetry that does not belong to chance. But sonar's voice is not limited to the solid floor of the sea. It can also trace the movement of life. Schools of fish scatter as a wave of sound passes. Whales leave great slow arcs in the water. Plankton blooms rise and fall in shimmering clouds. In this way, sonar listens to the living as well as the still, capturing a chorus of motion beneath the waves. And there are other songs in the deep, songs the ocean sings without our prompting. Whales call to one another across hundreds of miles, their voices low and resonant, bending through layers of water. Earthquakes send tremors that ripple outward like drum beats from the ocean's floor. Even ice speaks, vast shelves cracking with a sound like distant thunder, bergs grinding against one another in a mournful groan. To a poet, these are voices. To a scientist, they are data. Yet in both views, they are messages from a place where we cannot live, only visit. And so we listen, patiently, as if we might one day hear the sea say the name of a place we have been searching for all along. For those who dream of Atlantis, sonar offers a kind of hope no other tool can. It allows us to see where eyes cannot, to trace the contours of lands no diver could reach in a lifetime. Expeditions have scanned the seafloor near the Azores, off the coasts of Spain and Morocco in the Caribbean's turquoise depths, each pass of the sonar painting another layer onto the unseen canvas. Sometimes the images reveal only ridges and plains. Sometimes they show something stranger, what could be streets, plazas, walls. Most are explained as natural formations, but the possibility remains that one day one of these shapes will hold. One of them will match the city in the story. There is a paradox in listening to the deep. The clearer our instruments become, the more we realize how much remains unspoken. Even the most advanced sonar cannot tell us the whole of what it sees. Only the distance, the hardness, the general shape. It is still up to human eyes, human minds to interpret the echoes. And in that gap between sound and meaning, mystery thrives. Perhaps that is why the metaphor of music feels so fitting. A song is never only its notes. It is the space between them, the emotion they stir, the way they linger after the last chord fades. The ocean's song is like that. It lives in the resonance, in the half-answer, in the waiting for the next refrain. Imagine for a moment the sonar ping as a bell struck in a cathedral of water. The sound rushes outward, touching walls unseen, then returns. Softened, altered, telling you something of the space you cannot touch. You send another and another, building a map of echoes until you can almost walk those halls in your mind. Somewhere in those imagined corridors might stand the columns of a drowned temple, or the foundations of a city that has waited in the dark for thousands of years. We listen because the deep still sings. We listen because every echo carries the possibility of recognition. That one day the return will not be the shapeless tone of rock and sand, but something more deliberate. Something made. Something that will tell us in its own silent way, "You have found me." Until then, the songs in the sonar remain what they have always been. The voice of a vast hidden world, patient and unhurried, calling us back for another listen. The sea keeps what it takes, but not always in silence. Sometimes it leaves behind a trail, not of clear answers, but of suggestions, hints, fragments that invite the mind to stitch them into a story. Shipwrecks are among the most eloquent of these fragments. They lie on the seabed like punctuation marks in an unfinished sentence, each one a pause in history, each one holding a whisper of the time it sailed. Near many of the sites proposed for Atlantis, the wrecks lie scattered like breadcrumbs. They are not Atlantean themselves, at least none so far have proven to be. But their presence adds texture to the waters where the legend breathes. A shipwreck is a fixed point in time. It tells us who sailed here, what they carried, and sometimes what dangers awaited them. In the wider search for a lost city, they are small, anchored truths. Off the coast of southern Spain, in the waters near Cadiz, lies a cluster of ancient wrecks, Phoenician, Roman, and medieval. their timbers softened by centuries under silt. These shores have long been a candidate for Atlantis, placed there by theorists who see in the Doñana wetlands the outline of a once grand harbor. The wrecks here speak of a coastline that has shifted, of ports that rose and fell, of trade routes that may have been centuries old by the time Plato wrote his tale. Farther into the Atlantic, around the Azores, divers have found wooden hulls and iron anchors resting among lava flows. The islands themselves are volcanic, their cliffs plunging straight into deep water, and some researchers have suggested they might be the mountain peaks of a submerged landmass. The wrecks here are often younger, the bones of 15th and 16th century voyages, but they testify to the enduring lure of these waters, to the sense that even in the age of discovery, sailors sought something more than mapped lands. In the Caribbean, where another branch of Atlantis theory takes root, the seabed is littered with ships from every era: Spanish galleons heavy with silver, English privateers, steamships claimed by hurricanes. Near the Bahamas' Bimini Road, a stretch of submerged stone blocks that some believe could be remnants of an ancient harbor wall, lie the remains of vessels brought down by reefs and storms. None are ancient enough to be Atlantean, but their bones mark a passage where legends and navigators' logs overlap. Each wreck is a time capsule sealed in salt. Sometimes the cargo survives, amphorae still smelling faintly of the wine they once carried, coins bearing the profiles of long-dead rulers, ceramics painted with patterns from distant shores. Sometimes it is the ship itself that tells the story. The way its timbers were joined, the curve of its hull, the nails driven by a certain culture's hand. These details help archaeologists trace the web of connections across the ancient world, showing how goods, ideas, and people moved, and where their paths might have crossed the territory of myth. But the value of these wrecks in the Atlantis story is not only in their dates or locations. It is in the way they reveal the constancy of human movement through these waters. The ships that now rest in silence once followed currents that have not changed in thousands of years. If Atlantis had been real, these same currents could have carried its traders to other ports, its explorers to new lands, and in reverse could have brought strangers to its harbors. The wrecks proved the routes were there, open to those bold enough to take them. There is also a more haunting possibility. Some wrecks lie in places where no obvious hazard explains their loss. They are far from shoals in waters calm when the ship went down. For some theorists, such sites fuel speculation about sudden violent events: a tsunami, an underwater landslide, a seismic shift. Events like these could erase not only a ship, but a city. In this way, shipwrecks become more than artifacts. They are waypoints in an invisible map, marking where human history brushes against the deep secrecy. A scatter of anchors here, a cargo spill there. These are the crumbs we follow, not knowing if they lead to a feast or to a locked door. The incomplete puzzle remains just that, incomplete. But each new discovery, each ship drawn up from the dark, adds another piece to the edge of the picture. Perhaps it will be the discovery of a ship carrying goods that match no known civilization. Perhaps it will be a wreck lying atop ruins clearly older than itself. Or perhaps it will be a single artifact, made of a metal we have no record of crafting, found far from any known source. Until then, the wrecks keep their watch. They lie quiet under the weight of water, their masts long gone, their sails dissolved into the currents. But they are not silent in the truest sense. They speak, in the grain of their wood, in the shape of their keels, in the scatter of their cargo. And their voices point always toward something deeper, just beyond the edge of certainty. I begin the descent the way you begin a familiar song. A breath held a beat too long, a tilt from daylight into dusk. The boat wavers above me, a pale hull turning in place. The ladder rattled when I slipped away. Already the noise is memory. What remains is water on the hood, water against the cheeks, water pressing its cool hand across the ribs until the heart agrees to move at the ocean's pace. Particles turn in the sun like dust in a cathedral. The guide rope drifts beside me, swollen with salt. I touch it, then let it go. I want the body to find its own measure of falling, the steady kick and counter-kick, the rhythm that becomes as simple as walking. 5 meters. 10. Above me the surface thins to a trembling mirror. Sky, wind, and chatter fold into a single lid that I could lift if I wished, though I will not. I have chosen the quieter world, and the quieter world accepts me without comment. At 15 meters, the colors begin to surrender. Red goes first, then orange. Yellow sighs and recedes. Blue remains, generous and endless. My hands look borrowed from another creature. Each exhale sends a silver rope of bubbles up to the ceiling, eager and thoughtless, breaking themselves without once looking back. The floor arrives softly, ripples of sand like the fingerprints of the tide. I hover, adjusting with a breath. Far off, a darker hump bulges against the bottom, only a rock, then not only a rock. Barnacles stipple it like constellations. Anemones open and close with the unhurried logic of prayer. A crab moves among them like an awkward idea, all elbows and purpose. I did not come to discover, I came to listen. Listening down here is a posture more than an act. I slow the kick. I let the arms hang loose, the fingers trailing like seagrass. The ocean answers without words. A thread of current brushes the right shoulder. A cooler ribbon slips beneath the wrist, counting the pulse. The mask brings the horizon near. Nothing is far. Everything within reach of the eyes, if not the hands. A slope leads seaward, and I follow. Sand becomes shell grit, then rubble, then ledges banded with dark. A school of fish hangs like commas in slow water. When I pass, they pivot in a single thought. For a moment, I am the center of a sentence the sea is writing. Stories surface. People find coins, amphorae, a carved corner of stone, and a flexible part of the mind reaches out. Want is easy down here. It feels like wakefulness, not greed. But the ocean has etiquette. I tuck the wanting back like a loose strand of hair. I look again. Attention replaces appetite. Attention is rewarded. Garden eels perform their bows from a ledge the size of a table, retreating and extending with monastic patience. A sea star moves so slowly it seems a trick, yet if you hold still long enough you can watch ambition advance grain by grain. Purpose is small here, and absolute. Signs abound when you accept them on the sea's terms. A ring of shells radiates from a dark hole. Someone lives there. A puff of sand drifts and settles. Someone has just left. A scoured patch of hardpan looks freshly brushed. Perhaps a storm rehearsed there last season. Perhaps a ray will read the script later, gliding low and letter sure. I drift over a low wall of limestone fractured like old masonry. Habit nips. A decade of reading stone for meaning tightens the breath. It is only the way water carves, I tell myself, and still there is an ache. The mind wants patterns the way the lungs want air. I place a palm on the wall. It is cool, pitted, honest. The ocean offers sculpture lessons for anyone patient enough. Repetition, pressure, time. A shadow crosses the high mirror. A turtle moves above, slow as a thought you have been trying to remember all morning. The cleaner fish that follow it travel like careful readers. Nothing hurries. Even time seems to exhale and wait. The gauge is kind. The reef thins to a meadow of seagrass. The blades bow and rise in a faint, persistent wind. Bubbles bead along their edges like dew. I want to lie back and be held by green as I have on land. But buoyancy has its own opinions. Instead, I hover and watch two seahorses rotate in slow consultation, grandparents on a porch. The regulator turns my smile into a private rumor. Sound lives here, refined rather than loud. Shrimp crackle like distant rain on tin. Farther off, something knocks, metal on metal maybe, or the memory of it traveling through water with stubborn faith. Once a long, low syllable bends through the layers. Whale or current, it does not matter. Reply is not required to belong. The meadow ends at a clean lip into blue. I hang at the edge and peer over as if from a balcony. The deep below is not threatening. It is generous with room. A ray materializes and slides past like a thought completed. I follow for a minute, then turn back. I am learning the difference between invitation and summons. On the return, I notice what I missed. The ghost of a net, furred with algae. A corner of sand molded to a current's shape. A tiny octopus playing rock then, when my attention betrays its disguise, becoming a traveling shadow instead. We regard each other for a second, its eye a polished idea, mine a round window, and then we move on with a mutual promise to forget. The rope appears again, simple and sincere. I hold it loosely, not from need, but from wanting the farewell to include a touch. Ascending is another kind of listening. For nitrogen whispering its exit, for the lungs negotiating with buoyancy as meters unwind. Colors return in stages, yellow first, then orange, then the rumor of red at the mask's edge. With them comes a sharper sense of time. At 5 meters I pause, letting minutes collect like coins in a jar. The ocean tugs at the suit and releases it, a patient tide rehearsing ownership. I think not of cities or treasure, but of how the water has been everywhere I have not, and kept every place without complaint. I think of how it refuses to hurry for anyone, how it lends us time if we promise to return it uncreased. The surface receives me reluctantly, as if returning a book not quite finished. The boat is close. The ladder is more welcoming than before. I climb with the careful clumsiness of someone who has not yet chosen a gravity. On deck, sounds return with edges, voices, zippers, the hollow drum of a tank on fiberglass. Someone asks what I saw down there. I consider telling them about the wall, the seahorses, the octopus that rearranged itself like a sentence. Small things, I think, accurate as stars. I listened, I say instead. Later, as the shore becomes a charcoal line and the waves offer their patient applause to the hull, I close my eyes and feel what drew me down in the first place. It is not hunger for secrets, not conquest. It is the kindness of being held by something older and larger than yourself. The way a tree holds wind, the way a mountain keeps evening light. The ocean does not request trust, yet it gives comfort when you offer it. It does not promise answers, yet it dissolves the sharpest questions into gentler folds. Tomorrow there will be work, talk, and the ordinary ropes of time. Tonight the quiet pull continues, a soft gravity in the chest. I do not need a name for it. I do not need a city to justify it. The listening is enough. The listening I bring back in my lungs in a pulse that still seems to move in tides. If a legend waits out there somewhere beyond charts and proofs, I hope it is well. I hope it hears us too, sending our small, bright bubbles upward like notes in a hymn the sea remembers by heart. Certainty feels solid. It stands like a stone in the mind, a foundation you can build upon, a weight you can trust. We crave it because the world is restless, because the sea changes its face each hour, because the line between what is known and what is guessed can shift without warning. And yet certainty is not the unshakable rock we imagine it to be. Sometimes it is a mirage, clear at a distance, dissolving when we step closer. History is crowded with examples of how the strongest evidence can mislead. A coin unearthed far from its mint suggests a lost colony, until it is revealed to have been carried there by a wandering trader centuries later. A map with an island neatly inked in the margins promises a new land, until a later survey shows only empty water. Even in the age of satellites and sonar, we mistake shadows for structures, sand ridges for walls, natural arches for the deliberate work of human hands. It is not that the evidence is false, it is that it is incomplete. The ocean, in particular, has a talent for turning fragments into convincing stories. A single carved block on the seafloor may once have been part of a temple, or it may be the product of geological forces that shape stone with as much artistry as any mason. A scatter of amphorae may mark the site of an ancient harbor, or simply the place where a ship broke apart in a storm. In the deep, context is often missing, and without context, even the clearest find can lead us astray. We have been fooled before. In 1872, off the coast of Japan, fishermen dredged up stone formations unlike anything they had seen: terraces, steps, and flat-topped platforms. For decades, these were taken as proof of a lost civilization, their geometry too precise to be natural. Only much later did geologists demonstrate how volcanic rock can fracture into neat, angular shapes under pressure. The steps were real. Their story had been invented. The pull of a good explanation is strong. Once we think we understand a thing, the mind resists reopening the question. This is why early theories about Atlantis fixed it firmly in certain locations, only to be challenged again and again as new evidence emerged. A marsh was once thought to be the remains of its harbor, until sediment dating showed it had formed long after the time Plato described. A chain of undersea mountains was once claimed as the ridges of its walls, until further mapping revealed them as volcanic, their forms shaped by fire rather than human design. The danger lies not in looking, but in stopping too soon. Certainty freezes the search. It encourages us to see only what supports what we already believe. This is as true for the skeptic as for the dreamer. To dismiss Atlantis outright because we have not yet found it is as premature as to declare it found because of one promising clue. In both cases, the door closes before the room has been explored. The sea teaches a different lesson, that knowledge is provisional, as fluid as the tides. Charts are redrawn, theories shift. What we take for solid land can sink. What we assume is forever lost can rise again. The great cathedrals of coral begin as fragile polyps. The vast sandbanks of the deep are in constant motion, rearranged grain by grain. It is only on the surface that things appear still. Approaching the Atlantis question with humility means accepting that even the most persuasive evidence can change shape under new light. It means allowing for the possibility that what seems like proof may be the start of a different story entirely. This does not weaken the search. It strengthens it, keeping it open to what we do not yet know. Imagine holding a shard of pottery in your hand, its glaze still gleaming from centuries under the sea. You can measure it, date it, trace the minerals in its clay. But you cannot with certainty say who held it last, or how it came to rest in the sand at your feet. The facts you can prove are only the bones. The flesh of the story remains beyond reach. To claim otherwise is to step into the mirage. In this way, the pursuit of Atlantis is not only a hunt for a lost city, but a constant negotiation with the limits of knowledge. It asks us to balance the thrill of discovery with the discipline of doubt, to hold each piece of evidence lightly enough that it can shift if the truth demands it. It invites us to walk towards certainty, knowing it may dissolve as we approach, and to keep walking anyway. Because sometimes what lies beyond the mirage is not disappointment, but something stranger and more beautiful than we imagined. The path that began with a mistaken assumption can still lead to an undiscovered reef, an uncharted trench, or a chapter of human history we did not know we had lost. The false certainty fades, but the journey it began remains. The sea is patient with our errors. It lets us draw our conclusions, then quietly rearranges the sand. In time, we learn to see the shimmer in the distance for what it is, not a promise of final answers, but a sign that there is more ahead. And in that shifting light, the search becomes not a race to claim the truth, but an endless conversation with a world that will always keep some of its secrets. Some stories live longer than the evidence that first gave them shape. They move from the hands of witnesses to the lips of their children, from the records of scribes to the songs of travelers, until the original proof, whatever it once was, is gone. What remains is the story itself, bright and whole in the mind, even as the trail back to reality fades into mist. History is full of such legends. The city of Troy was once dismissed as pure invention, a poetic backdrop for Homer's Iliad. For centuries, scholars spoke of it as literature, not geography, until the late 19th century, when a determined archaeologist dug into the hill of Hizarlik in modern-day Turkey and found walls, gates, and layers of a city destroyed and rebuilt many times. The poems had outlived the proof, but they had also preserved a memory the earth itself had kept hidden. Other stories never return to the realm of fact, yet they endure all the same. The 7 cities of gold lured explorers deep into the deserts of North America, their gleam undimmed by repeated disappointment. Time after time, expeditions came back with no more than sunburn and stories, and still the next expedition set out. The cities lived on, not because they were found, but because the longing for them was stronger than the weight of their absence. In some cases, the loss of proof is sudden. Fires can consume libraries in a single night, as in Alexandria, where the knowledge of whole civilizations may have gone to smoke. Earthquakes and floods can erase the physical outlines of a place, leaving nothing for future generations to touch. In such cases, the legend survives because it fills a void. The mind cannot bear an empty space where something magnificent once stood, so it builds with memory and imagination what time has taken away. The endurance of a legend also lies in its adaptability. Facts are fixed, they can be disproved. Stories can bend. They shift to fit new tellers, new times, new listeners. Atlantis has moved across oceans in the telling, changed size, culture, and purpose, yet remained Atlantis. This ability to adapt makes a legend resilient. It can survive changes in language, in politics, in the very map of the world, because it is not bound to one version of itself. Belief is not always about evidence. Often it is about meaning. A legend that speaks to a deep human desire for justice, for paradise, for lost wisdom, will find listeners even when proof is lacking. The story becomes a mirror, reflecting not the facts of history but the hopes and fears of the present. To seek Atlantis is to seek the possibility that greatness once existed, that it might be found again, or that its fall might teach us something vital. Sometimes the absence of proof even strengthens belief. The mystery becomes part of the appeal. If Atlantis had been conclusively found and catalogued, it would belong to museums and textbooks. Unfound, it belongs to everyone. It lives not in a single set of coordinates, but in every mind willing to imagine it. There is also the matter of trust. We inherit many of our oldest stories from cultures whose records we can only partly understand. The myths of Polynesia speak of islands that no longer appear on maps. Norse sagas describe lands across the sea long before Europe officially reached them. When the physical evidence is gone or buried, the choice to believe becomes an act of respect for those who told the story first. The survival of a legend is, in the end, an act of will. It continues because people repeat it. around fires, at tables, in books, in quiet conversations on long journeys. Each telling plants the seed again, and in the soil of curiosity, it grows. Even when proof fades, the shape of the story remains like the outline of a vanished building traced in the grass. Atlantis is one of these enduring shapes. Whether it began as history or parable, its survival has made it something larger than either. It has lived through centuries of changing maps, shifting seas, and skeptical scholarship, not because it has been proven, but because people have needed it. Needed its warning, its wonder, its possibility. Perhaps that is why the ocean does not rush to confirm or deny it. A found Atlantis would be an answer. The Atlantis we have is an invitation to search, to question, to imagine. And so the legend lives on, outlasting every scrap of proof carried forward not by certainty but by the persistence of belief. There is a point in every search where the instruments fall silent. The data stops. The coordinates yield nothing new. The maps, precise and careful, reach a blank edge. Beyond it lies not more evidence but an open expanse of possibility. It is here, on this narrow strip between what can be measured and what can only be imagined, that science meets the shoreline of faith. Science is a discipline of boundaries. It asks questions that can be tested, sets conditions that can be repeated, demands results that can be verified by anyone who follows the same steps. Within those bounds, it is powerful. It can map the ocean floor to the meter, trace the drift of a single grain of sand, even listen to the creak of tectonic plates moving in the dark. But Atlantis does not live entirely within those bounds. Its coordinates shift, its descriptions bend, and its existence cannot be confirmed by one clean measurement. And so the scientific method does what it must. It pushes outward until the tools can go no farther, and then it stops. The leap beyond is not science's to make. That space belongs to something else. Not blind belief, but a kind of trust in the value of continuing to look even without certainty of finding. For some, this is a frustrating place. The absence of proof feels like the end of the road, and anything beyond it like stepping off solid ground into fog. For others, it is where the search truly begins. The lack of hard evidence does not erase the pull of the story. It sharpens it. Here, logic and longing stand side by side, neither able to fully replace the other. In practice, most seekers of lost places carry both. The scientist knows the limits of the instruments, but also feels the quiet tug of wanting the legend to be true. The dreamer may lead with hope, but accepts the need for method, for proof that can stand outside their own belief. They meet on this shared shoreline, where the tide moves in and out, sometimes bringing a shell, sometimes leaving only foam. This meeting point is not unique to Atlantis. Archaeologists excavating ancient cities often begin with little more than a rumor, a name in an old text, or a scatter of artifacts found far from their expected home. Astronomers searching for planets in distant star systems first detect only the faintest dimming of light, a suggestion, not a certainty. In both cases, science provides the tools to test the possibility, but it is hope that fuels the patience to keep testing. The danger comes when hope outruns the evidence entirely, when faith is mistaken for fact. Then the shoreline blurs, and the sea of speculation can sweep the search away from any anchor. But hope, held carefully, can be a compass. It keeps the search alive through long silences, failed expeditions, and the slow crawl of new technology. In the story of Atlantis, this balance is what keeps it timeless. Science maps the ridges, measures the sediment, dates the layers. Faith imagines the walls rising from the water, the streets alive with color and sound. Between them lies the possibility that one day the two will meet, that a sonar return, a diver's camera, or a core sample will move the legend from the realm of belief into the ledger of fact. Until then, the shoreline remains, the place where science sets down its instruments and steps back, and where hope quietly steps forward to keep watch over the horizon. Here in the hush between proof and dream, Atlantis continues to exist, not only as a question but as a reason to keep asking. They set out in the years when the world still felt full of blank spaces. Even as the 20th century quickened around them, trains cutting through landscapes, telegraphs carrying voices faster than ships could sail, there remained regions where mystery held the map by its edges. For a certain kind of person, that was invitation enough. And for some of them, the word Atlantis was not just a legend, it was a destination. The first expeditions were not the sleek, well-funded operations of later decades. They were patchwork ventures. A schooner hired from a weathered captain who knew those waters, a crate of instruments purchased with the last of an inheritance, a crew made up of loyal friends, curious strangers, and at least one sailor who thought the whole thing foolish but liked the pay. In 1911, there was Dr. Harold Summers, an archaeologist from Cambridge, who had already made a modest name uncovering Phoenician harbors in the Mediterranean. Summers was not given to grand gestures. He was quiet, deliberate, with the air of a man more comfortable in the company of old stones than crowded lecture halls. Yet he carried a conviction that Plato's words were not merely allegory. He believed Atlantis lay within the reach of patient study, somewhere near the Azores, perhaps, or beyond Madeira. Summers' first voyage was humble. A 90-foot brigantine, 2 divers with copper helmets and lead boots, a set of crude dredging tools. They searched in a slow grid, lowering themselves into the cold Atlantic, returning with little more than volcanic rock and the occasional amphora fragment. In his logbook, Summers did not call this a failure. Even stones have stories, he wrote, but the funding council back in England saw no headlines, no proof, and his backers quietly turned their attention elsewhere. In the 1920s, the hunt took on a different flavor. This was the age of grand adventure, when pilots raced to cross oceans and mountaineers vied for peaks. Among these was Captain Elias Duarte, a Portuguese-born seafarer whose weather-beaten face seemed carved from the cliffs of his homeland. Duarte had fished the mid-Atlantic as a boy and claimed to have glimpsed strange structures through crystal-clear shallows, walls where there should be only sand. His expedition in 1924 was all swagger and optimism. 2 steel-hulled vessels, a crew of 30, and enough provisions to last half a year at sea. Duarte's men dredged the seafloor near the Azores, pulling up coral-crusted artifacts. Most were tools and pottery from known eras, but the captain held up one block of cut stone to the press in Ponta Delgada and declared, "This is from Atlantis." Skeptics pointed out it could have been ballast from a long-forgotten ship, but the photograph ran in newspapers from Lisbon to New York. Duarte returned home a hero to some, a showman to others. Then there was Anna Whitcomb, an American writer whose interest in Atlantis began not in ports or libraries, but in the red deserts of New Mexico. She had grown fascinated by the similarities she saw between Native American flood myths and the story told by Plato. In 1932, armed with notebooks and a restless sense of connection, she sailed for the Caribbean to follow a theory that the lost city lay not in the old world, but the new. Whitcomb's journey was less about dredges and more about listening. She traveled from island to island, speaking with elders who told of sunken lands, of temples glimpsed in the shallows on calm days, of roads that once ran between islands now separated by deep channels. She recorded their words carefully, sketching what they described. No artifacts came of her voyage, but her published account, The Sea That Remembers, brought the warmth of human voice to the cold coordinates of the hunt. To her readers, Atlantis became less a ruin to be found and more a memory to be respected. By the late 1930s, technology began to change the expeditions. Depth sounders developed for naval use allowed explorers to see the contours of the seafloor in ways unimaginable to Summers or Whitcomb. In 1938, a Franco-Spanish team led by marine engineer Luis Herrera mapped an unusual plateau off the coast of Morocco, dotted with what appeared to be symmetrical rises. For weeks, they dragged grappling hooks across it, hoping to catch on a wall or column. They brought up only tangles of seaweed and chunks of limestone. Herrera returned to Madrid insisting that the shapes were man-made, worn down by 1,000 years of tide. His critics replied that the sea could carve as well as it could conceal. There were triumphs of a quieter kind. An unnamed fishing crew out of Madeira stumbled upon a marble statue's head caught in their nets, the eyes blank, the features eroded but unmistakably human-made. It was passed from hand to hand, from tavern to museum, sparking weeks of speculation before experts traced the marble to a 17th-century Portuguese shipwreck. The hope that had flared died down, but the taste of possibility lingered. These early hunters, for all their differences in skill and style, shared something essential. They were willing to go, to put to sea in pursuit of a story older than their grandfathers' grandfathers. They accepted the likelihood of disappointment, yet each believed that the next dive, the next haul, the next conversation could turn the tide. The failures were not always dramatic. Sometimes they came as a slow erosion of support, letters from sponsors that no longer spoke of when, but of if. Sometimes they came as bad weather that held a ship in port for weeks, eating through supplies and morale. And sometimes they came in the form of simple, aching absence, the realization that after months of searching, the ocean had revealed nothing new. And yet there was a quiet success in the persistence itself. Summers, Duarte, Whitcomb, Herrera. None found Atlantis, but each returned with something the world had not seen before. New maps of the seabed, preserved oral histories, artifacts that told other unexpected stories. Their work added strokes to the larger picture, even if it did not reveal the whole scene. Looking back, it is tempting to measure them by what they failed to find. But the truth is, their voyages were part of a longer conversation, one that stretches from the first telling of the legend to the sonar pings and satellite scans of today. The early hunters sailed not only in search of a city, but in search of the edge of the known world and of themselves. And in that, they found something lasting. The proof that the horizon will always have more to give to those willing to follow it. The hunt for Atlantis has always been shaped by the tools at hand. At first, those tools were simple: ropes and lead weights to measure depth, brass compasses to hold a course, and the human eye straining through waves for shapes that might not belong. These methods gave little more than suggestion: a dark patch beneath the water, a sudden rise on the seabed, a fisherman's tale of stone blocks glimpsed on a calm day. But as the 20th century advanced, the search began to change. Machines could go where men could not, and the ocean, once an unbroken veil, began to thin. Each leap in technology brought the hope that this would be the breakthrough, that at last the lost city would rise in the clear relief of data. Yet each leap also seemed to leave Atlantis just beyond reach, like a distant shore glimpsed through fog. The first revolution came with the submarine. In the years after World War I, navies had learned to slip beneath the waves in steel hulls, and soon explorers adapted the idea. Early research submarines were cramped, noisy vessels, metal tubes with thick glass portholes. But they allowed the first extended human eyes-on exploration of the deep. From their rounded windows, divers could see the seabed passing under their slow crawl. Coral forests, volcanic cliffs, strange structures that might be ruins, or might be the tricks of geology. The promise was intoxicating, but the deep's riddles remained. By mid-century, sonar had joined the search. Born of wartime necessity, sonar became the oceanographer's echoing torch. With it, the floor of the sea could be sketched without ever laying eyes on it. Beams of sound mapped out ridges, trenches, and plateaus, sometimes revealing shapes that looked tantalizingly like the outlines of buildings or walls. Expeditions to the Azores, the Caribbean, and the Mediterranean returned with such images, ghostly grids on the seafloor, that sparked headlines and debate in equal measure. Yet when divers or cameras followed, the grids dissolved into natural formations, the sea quietly folding its secrets back into the folds of stone. Then came remotely operated vehicles, ROVs, which could dive far deeper than any human body could endure. Tethered to ships by cables that carried both power and signal, they hovered over the seabed like cautious birds, their cameras peering into cracks and crevices, their arms ready to collect samples. In the 1980s and 90s, ROVs roamed areas suspected to hide Atlantis. The volcanic slopes near the Canary Islands, the Bahama Banks, the strange terrace-like formations off Japan's Yonaguni coast. They brought back hours of footage, breathtaking landscapes under crushing pressure, but no indisputable city. Satellites extended the reach even further. Orbiting hundreds of miles above, they could detect the faint swell in the sea's surface caused by underwater mountains and ridges. These swells, no more than a few centimeters high, could reveal features thousands of meters below. Suddenly, entire swaths of ocean were charted in days, regions that would have taken decades to map from ships. Atlantis hunters pored over these maps, tracing ridges that might have been ancient roads, circling seamounts that could be the last peaks of a drowned plateau. But once again, each lead was tempered by the truth. The shapes might be geological, their symmetry a quirk of volcanic birth or tectonic strain. More recently, autonomous underwater vehicles, AUVs, have joined the search. Freed from cables, they roam according to pre-programmed routes, sweeping the seafloor with high-resolution sonar, laser scanners, and photogrammetry equipment. The images they produce are so sharp that individual boulders can be counted, sediment ripples traced. In theory, such clarity could reveal the straight line of a wall, the perfect arc of a harbor. In practice, it has shown us a deep ocean more varied and beautiful than we imagined, but still without Atlantis. And yet, with each new tool, the legend seems to shift closer, if only by inches. Not because we are nearer to proof, but because the barriers to looking have fallen away. What was once hidden by depth, darkness, and pressure is now visible in maps, photographs, and models. We know the terrain in which Atlantis would have stood. We know where it cannot be. The empty spaces grow smaller. Still, there is a kind of poetry in the fact that the city remains out of sight. Every new advance sharpens the picture, but never to the point of finality. The satellites that chart ocean ridges cannot tell whether a stone was cut by hand. The sonar that outlines a terrace cannot say whether it held gardens or only sand. The ROV's camera can pan across a square of carved rock, but cannot give it a name. This is the paradox of the search. The more we can see, the more we understand the scale of what we do not know. Technology has not diminished the mystery. It has deepened it. Each image, each scan, each measured contour reminds us that the ocean is not an empty vault waiting to be unlocked, but a living world that decides what to reveal and what to keep. And so, the work continues. Submarines still slip beneath the waves, ROVs still crawl across the deep, satellites still sweep their orbits. Somewhere in their data might be the faint line, the subtle shadow, the overlooked anomaly that begins the final chapter of the hunt. Until then, Atlantis remains what it has always been, not just a place to be found, but a horizon that moves as we approach, calling us forward into the next leap. They do not speak of it often, at least not to those outside the circle. To admit how much of one's life has been given to a city that may not exist is to invite misunderstanding, even pity. But among those who have felt the pull, there is no need to explain. They know the way Atlantis settles into the mind, not as a passing curiosity, but as a quiet, constant tide. For some, the search begins with a single spark, a book read in childhood, a lecture that left the air charged, a glimpse of ruins half buried in the sea. What begins as interest becomes habit, and habit becomes the lens through which the rest of life is viewed. They plan holidays near suspected sites. They spend evenings with maps spread across the kitchen table. Birthdays, anniversaries, and even grief are measured against the timetable of expeditions. There is a cost to that kind of devotion. Weeks at sea become months. Friendships thin in the long absences, some do not survive them. Partners at home grow used to empty chairs at dinner. Children learn to mark their parents' return not by the calendar but by the season's change in the wind. The searcher promises each time that this trip will be the one, though they know, and their family suspects, that the next one will be just as necessary. Even among fellow explorers, the hunt for Atlantis can be isolating. It sits apart from the sanctioned searches for shipwrecks or lost aircraft, too tangled in myth for the comfort of academic certainty. Grants are scarce, skepticism plentiful. Many who begin with companions find themselves over the years walking a narrower path, accompanied more often by their own thoughts than by colleagues. And yet there is beauty in the persistence. The ocean does not reward the impatient, and those who keep coming back learn to match its pace. They begin to notice changes others overlook, a subtle shift in a current, the way silt gathers in the lee of a rock, the faint echo in a sonar reading that wasn't there before. In these small observations is a kind of intimacy with the sea, one earned only by those who have given it years. There is also the strange freedom that comes from chasing something unproven. Without the certainty of success, there is no single measure of failure. A trip that finds no ruins may still return with a new map of a seamount, a rare photograph of deep-sea life, or simply the memory of a morning when the ocean lay perfectly still. These become treasures in their own right, moments to hold against the days when doubt is heavier than hope. Obsession has its own weather. Some days it is a steady wind at the back, filling the sails, carrying the searcher toward the horizon. Other days it is a storm that blocks the way forward, forcing them to circle in place. In the quiet between, when the sea is neither friend nor foe, they reckon with the question that haunts all long pursuits. If Atlantis were found tomorrow, would the finding be enough? Or is the search itself the true inheritance? Many come to suspect the latter. The years at sea, the nights poring over charts, the conversations in half-lit harbors. These are the substance of a life, not just the scaffolding for a goal. To walk away from the search would be to lose not only the dream, but the rhythm that has shaped their days. And so they continue, knowing that even if the city never rises from the waves, they have lived in its company. In the end, those who have given their lives to Atlantis do not speak of sacrifice. They speak of a kind of belonging, not to a place, but to a question. The ocean has let them in just far enough to keep them returning, has given them enough to wonder about, enough to believe in. The rest, it has kept for itself. And maybe that is the quiet bargain all searchers make, that the beauty of the journey will be worth the cost, even if the horizon never resolves into shore. Beneath the surface, far from the reach of tides that touch our feet, there are other cities, not Atlantis, but places that carry its echo. They rest in the stillness of the deep, their walls softened by silt, their streets walked now only by fish and currents. Some are well documented, mapped, and measured. Others are still half-claimed by mystery. Together they form a chorus of shadow cities, each with its own story, each a reminder that the sea has swallowed more than one chapter of human history. Off the southern coast of Japan lies Yonaguni, perhaps the most debated of them all. Discovered in the mid-1980s by a local diver, its massive stone terraces step down into the blue like the seats of an ancient amphitheater. Sharp-edged platforms and broad, flat walls give the uncanny impression of deliberate design. Some see here the work of ancient hands, a citadel carved by a long-forgotten culture. Others argue for geology. The island sits in a zone of seismic activity, where sandstone can fracture into unnervingly straight lines and right angles. Swimming through Yonaguni is to live in that tension. The surfaces are clean, the shapes insistent, a staircase that descends into shadow, a rectangular hall, flanked by what could be columns. Fish dart through gaps like whispers slipping between arguments. Whether made by people or by the patient mechanics of the earth, the site holds a gravity. It is proof, at least, that the seabed can wear the shape of a city, whether by art or accident. Far away in the waters off the coast of Greece lies Pavlopetri, quieter in its fame but surer in its identity. Here the outlines of streets and buildings are unmistakable. The city sank around 5,000 years ago, likely pulled under by earthquakes that reshaped the coastline. Today its grid of stone foundations lies in shallow, sunlit water, easy for divers to trace with their eyes. Archaeologists have mapped houses, courtyards, even open spaces that might once have been markets. Unlike Yonaguni, Pavlopetri's human origin is not in question. It is the oldest known submerged city in the world, a reminder that entire communities can and do slip beneath the sea. There are others. In the Bay of Cambay, off India's western shore, sonar surveys have revealed geometric patterns on the seabed, long lines and shapes suggestive of streets. Artifacts pulled from the site include pottery shards and worked stone, some dated to thousands of years before the Indus Valley civilization. Debate here is fierce. Are these remnants of an unknown city, or simply natural features dressed in coincidence? The water is murky, the current strong, making exploration slow and uncertain. Along the coast of Cuba, deep in the Yucatan Channel, a Canadian research team once recorded sonar images of massive stone-like blocks, some forming regular patterns. The site lies so deep that confirmation has been elusive. It could be a lost port, a collapsed landform, or something we have no name for yet. In its mystery, it sits alongside Atlantis, a nameless question held in salt water. In the shallows off Mahabalipuram in southern India, legend spoke of 7 pagodas, 6 temples swallowed by the sea, leaving only one on shore. In 2004, when a tsunami briefly pulled back the water, visitors saw outlines of walls and steps on the seabed. Later dives confirmed the remains of structures, their carvings worn but still clear enough to read. Lions, deities, patterns once meant to catch the light of the sun. Here, the line between myth and masonry has narrowed almost to nothing. These shadow cities connect to the Atlantis story in 2 ways. First, they prove that the sea has, again and again, taken human settlements whole. Pavlopetri and Mahabalipuram show that the idea of a thriving coastal city vanishing into the waves is not fantasy. It is part of history's rhythm. Second, they keep open the space in which Atlantis lives. If cities we did not know existed can be found beneath only a few meters of water, who can say what lies deeper, or in less forgiving seas? And yet, they also diverge. Atlantis, in Plato's telling, was an empire, a jewel of the world's center, swallowed in a single day and night. The shadow cities are smaller, quieter. They tell of earthquakes and shifting coasts, of gradual subsidence and sudden storms, but not of fleets that ruled the known world. They whisper of local loss, not global calamity. This difference does not make them lesser, but it does remind us that the story of Atlantis is not simply about submersion. It is about scale, ambition, and the fragility of power. Still, to swim among these ruins is to feel something that no page or map can quite capture. At Yonaguni, the water moves differently around the great steps, currents folding and curling as if in respect. At Pavlopetri, the sun slips through the surface in trembling grids as though the city were still lit from above. In Mahabalipuram, the carvings emerge from the haze like memories finding their shape again. Each site offers its own sensation of time layered and compressed, of the present brushing against the outline of the past. Perhaps this is the truest connection to Atlantis, not in the specifics of walls or harbors, but in the shared feeling they stir. The awareness that beneath us in the deep's patient keeping lie places where people once woke to the sound of waves, traded goods in market squares, built temples to gods whose names we may never know. They lived their lives close to the sea, trusting it, fearing it, loving it. And one day it took them. The shadow cities remind us that loss on this scale is not unique, and that what the ocean claims it does not always erase. Whether they are monuments to human craft or to nature's strange geometry, they are proof that the seabed can hold the memory of cities. And as long as that is true, Atlantis remains possible, not proven but not impossible either. It waits in the spaces between what we have found and what we have yet to see. What if we have been looking in the wrong place entirely? Not the wrong ocean or the wrong coordinates, but the wrong kind of map. Perhaps Atlantis has never been a point to plot, but a story to hold. Not a city of stone and streets, but a city built of memory, caution, and longing. Across cultures, myths often survive not because they are literally true, but because they speak to something deeper. They become containers for lessons, warnings, and ideals. In this way, Atlantis may be less a ruin awaiting discovery and more a mirror in which each age sees its own reflection. For Plato, it was a parable of hubris, a civilization whose brilliance was undone by its own excess. To others, it has been a symbol of lost perfection, a golden age before the decline. Each generation reshapes the city according to its own fears and desires. Consider the way the story has shifted over centuries. In the Renaissance, it became a symbol of ancient wisdom, proof that modern knowledge was a rediscovery of something older and grander. In the age of exploration, it was imagined as a distant land rich with resources, justifying voyages into the unknown. In the modern era, it has become a symbol of mystery itself, a stand-in for the idea that not everything has been explained. Atlantis has survived not by remaining fixed, but by changing to suit the needs of those who tell it. If we accept it as metaphor, new possibilities open. Atlantis could be a cultural memory of real events, perhaps the flooding of coastal cities at the end of the last ice age, when melting glaciers raised sea levels dramatically. Such floods would have been traumatic, reshaping landscapes and lives. Over generations, the details could fade, the geography blur, until what remained was a single distilled story, a great city swallowed by the sea. This reading aligns Atlantis with other flood myths found around the world, in Mesopotamia, in the Pacific Islands, among indigenous peoples of the Americas. These are not all literal accounts of the same event, but they share the recognition that water can erase whole worlds. In this way, Atlantis could be the Greek branch of a much older tree of stories, each leaf shaped by its own culture, each rooted in the human need to make sense of loss. Seeing Atlantis as metaphor does not make it less meaningful. If anything, it deepens its power. A physical city might one day be found or disproven. A symbolic one can remain relevant forever. As a metaphor, it invites us to ask, what is our Atlantis? What are we building now that might be lost? What warnings are we ignoring? The story becomes less about diving to the ocean floor and more about looking at the fragile ground under our own feet. This shift also reframes the searchers themselves. Those who have spent lifetimes chasing sonar blips and scanning ancient maps may, unknowingly, be participating in a different kind of quest. Not to locate a place, but to preserve an idea. Each expedition, each book, each debate keeps Atlantis alive in the collective imagination. The act of searching becomes the treasure, and perhaps this is why Atlantis resists being pinned down. If it were found tomorrow, photographed and catalogued, its mystery would change. It might become a historical site, fenced off and ticketed, its story told in plaques and guided tours. Valuable, yes, but no longer free to drift and transform in the minds of those who hear its name. In remaining unfixed, Atlantis continues to serve as a canvas onto which we can project our own longings for discovery, our own questions about the rise and fall of civilizations. Seen this way, the ocean is not the only keeper of Atlantis. It lives equally in our libraries, in the margins of old maps, in the conversations that begin with, "What if?" It exists wherever the human mind reaches beyond what it can prove, into the realm where possibility and imagination overlap. To shift the lens in this way is not to give up on the physical search. Rather, it is to add another layer, to recognize that even if the city's stones are never touched, Atlantis has already been found in the way it shapes thought. It has become a shared inheritance, passed quietly from storyteller to listener, from explorer to dreamer. And in that form, it will not sink. It will continue to surface again and again in the currents of human imagination. In the quiet hours of the search, when the engines are idle and the sea is calm, the question drifts in like a tide. Is it better to believe or to prove? Atlantis has lived for more than 2,000 years without a single piece of conclusive evidence. Its survival has depended on faith, not the kind tied to ritual or religion, but the steady belief that something extraordinary might exist just out of reach. Faith has its strengths. It keeps the story alive in the absence of proof. It draws people to the edge of maps and urges them to look beyond. Without it, there would be no expeditions, no late nights in archives, no divers descending into cold, dark waters in hope of a glimpse. Faith asks nothing more than that we remain open to possibility, that we keep a space in our minds for what has not yet been explained. But proof has its own gravity. It anchors the dream in the solid ground of the real. Proof can transform a story from a whisper to a fact, from a myth passed down to a chapter in history books. It satisfies curiosity in a way that no amount of imagining can. And yet proof can also close a door. Once something is explained, it often loses the shimmer of uncertainty that made it so magnetic in the first place. The search for Atlantis has always balanced between these two poles. Too much faith, and the city becomes whatever we want it to be, unmoored from reality. Too much proof, and it risks becoming just another entry in a catalog of ruins, stripped of the mystery that gave it life. The most enduring stories, perhaps, live somewhere in the middle, plausible enough to chase, uncertain enough to dream about. Those who spend years in the hunt often carry both. They know the thrill of a promising sonar image and the sting of finding only natural rock beneath it. They learn to let the disappointment pass without letting it harden into cynicism. They keep faith alive, but they also respect the slow, patient discipline that real evidence demands. They understand that belief is what fuels the journey, but verification is what would make the journey's end undeniable. For the rest of us, far from the deck of any research vessel, the balance is more personal. We can hold Atlantis as a place in the world, or as a place in the mind. We can delight in every new theory without demanding it be proven tomorrow. We can let it remain for now a shared mystery, one we tend together in conversations, in books, in quiet moments, staring out at the horizon. Perhaps the question is not which is more important, but how they work together. Faith keeps the story alive long enough for proof to have a chance. Proof, when it comes, honors the patience of faith. Until then, Atlantis floats between the two, a city built of both salt water and imagination, waiting in that space where belief and evidence meet, and neither fully claims it. The sea keeps its own records, written not in ink, but in absences. For every triumphant return from an expedition, there are names that never made it back to shore. Names spoken softly among those who search, as if the ocean itself might be listening. These are not just stories of loss, but of devotion, of people who gave themselves wholly to a mystery they could not let go. In the early years of the 20th century, before diving suits were anything more than heavy canvas and brass, a Greek sponge diver named Nikos set out in waters off the island of Santorini. He had heard whispers that ancient walls lay beneath the volcanic shelf, perhaps connected to the great eruption that some believed had swallowed Atlantis. His dives were long and dangerous, pushing the limits of the human body without oxygen tanks or safety lines. One morning he descended and did not come up. The others waited, watching the water for bubbles until the surface lay still. They found no trace of him, only the slow, unbroken swell of the Aegean. Decades later, in the Caribbean, a small crew aboard the research vessel Albatross was scanning the seabed off Bimini, following rumors of long, straight stone formations just offshore. The water was warm and clear, but the currents were strong that day, running like invisible rivers beneath the calm. 2 divers went down to measure the stones, only one came back. His partner was carried out into deeper water, his line found later, frayed and floating. The Bimini Road is still debated, natural or man-made, but for those who knew him, the site is marked on the map for a different reason. The 1970s, a French marine archaeologist named Claire Moreau dedicated her career to Mediterranean wrecks and submerged ruins. She was meticulous, cautious, never reckless. But on an expedition near the Straits of Gibraltar, a place many believe could be the Pillars of Heracles from Plato's account, a sudden squall swept in. The dive team surfaced to find their support boat drifting out of reach. Most were rescued by nearby fishermen, but Claire was last seen swimming hard against the wind and waves, her face turned toward the point they had been surveying. The storm broke the search apart, and when it cleared, she was gone. These losses are not confined to the deep. Some are claimed by the long, grueling demands of the search itself. A historian in Lisbon who spent decades tracking old merchant logs and shipping charts collapsed one winter night in his archive. The fire in his hearth burned down to embers. He had been working through another stack of salt-stained journals, chasing a single reference to an island west of the Azores that appeared in 3 separate centuries. His friends said he died with a pen still in his hand. Even modern technology offers no guarantee. In 2003, an experienced ROV operator named Daniel Hughes was part of a joint U.S.-Spanish survey off the coast of Cadiz. They were mapping an area of seafloor that had shown unusual formations on satellite imagery. One evening, while checking equipment on deck in rising swells, a rogue wave struck the vessel broadside. Daniel was swept overboard before anyone could reach him. The ship turned again and again in the churning dark, but the ocean had already closed over. For each of these, there are more, Smaller names, smaller headlines, but lives no less bound to the pursuit. They are remembered not as cautionary tales, but as threads in the long, tangled fabric of the search. Among explorers, their stories are told with a kind of reverence, not because their deaths make Atlantis more real, but because they prove the depth of the human pull toward it. And in a way, the ocean does not forget them. Those who dive in the same waters speak of feeling a presence, not in a mystical sense, but in the way the sea itself seems to carry memory. A sudden calm over a site where someone once vanished, a flash of sunlight through the water at the moment a diver surfaces. In these small moments, the living and the lost share the same horizon. There is a tenderness in how their names are kept. They are written in logbooks alongside coordinates and water depths. They are carved into plaques on ships, into the wood of harbors where they last departed. Sometimes they are simply spoken aloud before a dive, a way of saying, "We remember, we continue." The cost of the search is not always paid in lives, but when it is, it leaves a weight that the discovery of Atlantis itself could never balance. And yet, for those who knew them, the loss does not erase the dream. If anything, it sharpens it, a quiet promise that the search will not end here. That somewhere in the folds of the ocean the city still waits, and those who have gone ahead are part of its story now, written into the deep in a script only the sea can read. Beneath the water, an object changes, a clay jar, a bronze coin, a carved stone. Each takes on the slow patina of the sea, the softness of years held in salt. Lift it out and something is lost. The colors shift in the air, the weight feels different in the hand. For centuries, divers and explorers have brought such objects to the surface in the hope of learning from them. Yet with every recovery comes a question. Are we preserving history, or are we taking it from the place where it truly belongs? Treasure hunters see the ocean as a vault waiting to be opened. To them, an artifact's value is in its rarity, its beauty, sometimes its market price. The logic is simple. If the sea might destroy it, better to bring it into the light where it can be held, studied, displayed. But heritage asks for something slower, more careful. It suggests that meaning is not only in the object itself, but in the place, the context, the quiet it has known for centuries. Consider the difference between a gold cup in a museum case and that same cup lying on the seabed, half buried in sand, surrounded by the faint remains of a ship's hull. In the case, it is safe, admired by thousands, accompanied by a neat card telling its story. On the seabed, it tells its own story. One of loss, of the journey that brought it here, of the moment it left human hands and became part of the ocean's world. Remove it, and that context dissolves. The cup remains, but the story is thinner. The debate is older than Atlantis. Shipwrecks from the Spanish galleons to the Titanic have been caught between those who would recover their cargo and those who would leave them untouched. International agreements now recognize many sites as underwater cultural heritage, protecting them from salvage. Yet enforcement is uneven, and temptation is strong, especially where valuable metals or gems are involved. Atlantis, if ever found, would face this dilemma in its sharpest form. Imagine walls of orichalcum gleaming faintly in the dark, carved statues still standing in the quiet water. Would we take them out to prove the city's existence beyond doubt? Or would we leave them, preserving the city as it is? A dream made real but kept within the sea's embrace. Each choice carries a kind of loss. To leave them is to accept that many will never see them. To take them is to strip the place of the very thing that makes it whole. Archaeologists argue for the middle path: meticulous documentation, selective recovery, careful preservation. In their view, the goal is not to claim ownership, but to ensure the object's survival for future generations. Yet even then, the act of removal changes the story. A carved lintel brought to a laboratory can be cleaned, measured, dated, but it will never again rest under the slow sway of the currents, never again wear the thin lace of coral that time has given it. There is also the question of who the past belongs to. If Atlantis lies in international waters, who decides its fate? If it rests within a modern nation's territory, does that country hold sole claim, even if the city predates its existence by millennia? And if the legend belongs to the world's imagination, should not its reality be shared by all? These are questions with no easy answers, and history shows that answers often come too late, after the first artifacts are already gone. Some argue that the ocean itself is the best guardian. Left alone, a ruin can endure for centuries more, its artifacts safe from human greed, its story intact. Others counter that storms, shifting sands, and the slow work of marine life will eventually erase what we hope to protect. Between these views lies the fragile balance of action and restraint. Perhaps the truest measure is intention. To recover an object with the aim of selling it is to treat it as treasure. To recover it with the aim of understanding, and of sharing that understanding without diminishing its origin, is to treat it as heritage. The two may look the same in a glass case, but the difference is in the unseen weight they carry. In the end, the ethics of excavation are as much about humility as they are about law. To find something remarkable beneath the waves is to be given a momentary trust, a glimpse into a chapter of the past that has slept undisturbed. Whether we choose to lift it from its resting place or leave it there, the choice shapes not only how we know history, but how we respect it. Atlantis, should we ever stand at its gates, will ask us that question in the most difficult way. Not just what we will take, but what we are willing to leave behind. The Atlantis most people know is not the one Plato described. It is a city refracted through the lens of storytellers, filmmakers, novelists, and, in recent years, the endless churn of online headlines. Over centuries, the story has been embroidered, simplified, magnified, sometimes made richer, sometimes reduced to something that bears only a passing resemblance to the original. In books, Atlantis has been imagined as a crystal-domed utopia, a kingdom of merfolk, a technologically advanced empire capable of feats beyond our own. In films, it has been rendered in glowing CGI, complete with bustling streets and gleaming towers, designed to dazzle the eye more than to provoke thought. These visions can deepen fascination, pulling new audiences into the mystery. But they can also set expectations that no archaeological find could ever match. The media's influence began long before cinema. In the 19th century, writers such as Jules Verne and Ignatius Donnelly took Plato's brief account and expanded it into elaborate histories, blending speculation with pseudoscience. Donnelly's book Atlantis, The Antediluvian World, painted the city as the source of all ancient civilizations, a grand progenitor that spread culture across the globe. His work was less concerned with proof than with weaving a narrative people wanted to believe. It sold well, inspiring generations of readers, and planting seeds of theories still repeated today. By the mid-20th century, pulp magazines and adventure comics had turned Atlantis into a staple of popular imagination. It was no longer a single idea, but a dozen competing ones. A lost continent, a hidden city beneath the polar ice, a civilization sunk not by hubris but by cosmic disaster. Each retelling bent the story to fit the cultural mood of its time. Post-war optimism, Cold War paranoia, the environmental anxieties of the late 20th century. In the age of television, documentaries brought a new kind of authority. Narrators with measured voices and grainy underwater footage suggested that answers might be just around the corner. But even here, the pull of drama often outweighed the restraint of scholarship. Teasers promised definitive proof that by the episode's end remained elusive. The mystery was kept alive not by resolution but by the art of the cliffhanger. Today, the internet has amplified this dynamic. Clickbait headlines offer shocking new evidence or scientists stunned by discovery, only to deliver familiar photographs and speculative quotes. The algorithms favor sensation, stories that confirm what readers already want to believe. Serious research is sometimes lost in the noise, drowned out by viral posts that value speed over accuracy. In this environment, Atlantis can become less a historical puzzle and more a cultural meme, endlessly shared but rarely examined. And yet, media can also serve the mystery well. Thoughtful books and documentaries present the legend alongside real archaeological work, inviting audiences to appreciate both the romance of the tale and the rigor of the search. When done with care, storytelling can frame the unknown not as a void to be filled with fantasy, but as a space where imagination and inquiry can coexist. It can remind viewers that uncertainty is not a weakness in a story. It is part of its power. The public's perception of Atlantis will always be shaped by the images and narratives it encounters first. For many, that introduction comes not from Plato's Timaeus and Critias, but from a movie trailer or a viral article. Those first impressions can color the way all future evidence is received. If the real Atlantis is ever found, it will have to compete with centuries of expectation. A city of coral and ruin set against the glowing palaces of fiction. Perhaps that is the paradox. Media both keeps Atlantis alive and ensures it can never be entirely reclaimed by fact. Every retelling layers another veil over the original, even as it draws more eyes toward the legend. Without these stories, Atlantis might have faded into a dusty corner of classical literature. With them, it has become one of the most enduring mysteries of human culture. In this way, the media's role is not simply to inform or mislead, but to participate in the ongoing creation of Atlantis itself. Each headline, each illustration, each frame of film adds to the composite image in the world's mind. Whether those images bring us closer to truth or further from it depends on how they are made, and on how we choose to see through them. There is a peculiar kind of beauty in the things we cannot touch. Cities that lie beneath the sea, mountains no one has climbed, stories that end without telling us everything. They live differently in the mind than in the hand. Atlantis belongs to this realm, a place more vivid for being unseen. To find it might satisfy our curiosity, but it could also strip away the shimmer that comes from not knowing. Some cities, once uncovered, are diminished by the light. Their stones become specimens, their streets mapped and catalogued, their mysteries replaced by facts. We learn what they traded, how they built their walls, even the diseases that touched their bones. The wonder shifts from what if to what was, and while there is value in that, something is lost in the exchange. The city becomes part of history, solid, instructive, but no longer infinite. Atlantis, as it exists now, is infinite. It can be anything. A moral parable, a memory of flood, a vision of perfection, a warning against pride. It changes shape with the teller, fits itself to the fears and dreams of the age. This is the power of absence. It leaves space for the listener to enter, to complete the image with their own imagination. A found city closes that door. There is also the question of preservation. If Atlantis were discovered, could it ever be kept whole? The world would rush to see it. Scientists, divers, journalists, tourists, each with their own purpose, each taking something away, even if only a photograph or a story. In time, its quiet would be gone. The sea's slow guardianship would be replaced by human management, the currents of curiosity flowing faster than the tides. Some would argue that this is worth it. that to withhold knowledge from ourselves is a kind of loss. But perhaps the greater loss is to strip the world of one of its rare, shared mysteries. In an age where satellites can map the forest canopy and submarines can scrape the ocean floor, there are fewer and fewer places left to wonder about. The unknown is a fragile resource. Once it is spent, it cannot be restored. Mystery has another role. It humbles us. It reminds us that the world is older, larger, and stranger than our measurements can capture. Atlantis asks us to live with questions we cannot yet answer, to accept that the past is not entirely ours to command. In this way, it is more than a city. It is a practice, a way of holding the world with open hands instead of closed fists. And so, the idea that some cities should stay lost is not about refusing discovery, but about recognizing that discovery changes the thing we seek. It is about asking whether the act of finding will deepen or diminish the gift we already have. Sometimes the treasure is not in possessing the truth, but in carrying the question. Perhaps that is why, after centuries of searching, Atlantis remains where it began, in the space between certainty and dream. The ocean has had many chances to give it back, and it has not. We can take this as defiance or as a kind of mercy, an unbroken thread between all who have wandered across time and language, each of us standing at the shore and looking out, imagining what might lie beneath. In the end, the choice may not be ours. The sea keeps its secrets as it pleases. But we can choose how to hold the ones it has not yet given up. We can decide that part of the joy of living in a world still full of questions is letting some of them remain questions forever. Atlantis may be one of them, a city that exists most perfectly in the place where we cannot walk, cannot measure, cannot claim. A city that is ours only in the way the horizon is ours, always visible, never reached. There is a moment just before the diver descends when the surface holds both worlds at once. Above is the known, the deck beneath their feet, the clear line of the horizon, the catalog of facts we've gathered over lifetimes. Below is the unknown, a vast layered darkness where light dissolves, where each movement stirs shadows older than history. That edge, that breath between certainty and wonder is where the story of Atlantis has always lived. The known gives us anchor points. Plato's words, the measured depths of the seabed, the scatter of ruins we can date and name. These are the bones of history, the structures on which we build understanding. Without them, we drift. They offer proof that the past is real, that its shapes and patterns can be traced. They let us feel the comfort of a firm footing. The unknown, though, gives us lift. It is the reason we look beyond the horizon in the first place. It is the shimmer in the water that turns a wreck into a rumor, the gap in the map that draws the hand of the cartographer. Without it, we have no reason to search, no dream to chase when the facts fall silent. The unknown breathes life into the known, and the known, in turn, keeps the unknown from dissolving into fantasy. For Atlantis, this balance is delicate. Too much proof, and it becomes another entry in a museum catalog, impressive but finite. Too little, and it risks fading into myth so vague it no longer stirs the imagination. Its enduring power lies in hovering between the two. Enough detail to hold our attention, enough absence to keep us leaning forward. The beauty of the unproven is that it belongs to everyone. A found city can be fenced, ticketed, studied in climate-controlled rooms. But a mystery, a true mystery, lives in the mind. It can be carried inland, whispered in desert markets, pondered under polar skies. It changes shape with each telling, reflecting the hopes and fears of the teller. In this way, the unproven is not smaller than the proven. It is larger because it is shared. There is also a gentleness in not knowing. Certainty has a way of closing a door. Once a question is answered, it rarely calls us back in the same way. The unknown keeps that door open, lets the wind of possibility move through it. Atlantis remains beautiful not only for what it might be, but for all the things it could be. Each possibility a thread in a tapestry we weave together without ever finishing. As the search continues, this balance will always be in motion. A new find might tip it toward the known. A disproven theory might pull it back toward the unknown. But neither end can fully claim it. Atlantis exists in the tension between them, like the line between day and night, where light and shadow mingle and neither is complete without the other. Perhaps that is the final gift of this legend, to teach us how to live with both, to value the clarity of proof without rushing to strip the world of its questions, to hold the unknown not as a void but as a presence, a partner to the things we can see and touch, to understand that the map is never finished and that some of its most beautiful places may be the ones we never reach. So the diver pauses at the edge, feeling the water rise against their skin. They know the air above and they feel the pull of the dark below. They take one last breath, not to choose between them, but to enter the place where they meet. In that suspended moment, Atlantis is as real as it will ever need to be, not proven, not lost, but perfectly poised between the two, where the human spirit has always been most at home. The sea remembers in ways we cannot. It holds the shape of every coast that ever was, the shadows of ships long turned to silt, the faint trace of footsteps on shores now far below the tide. Currents pass these memories from one horizon to another, folding centuries into each slow, unbroken wave. If you listen, really listen, you might hear it, not in words, but in the hush between them. The rhythm of the swell against the hull, the distant sigh of foam on stone, the deep, almost hidden hum of water pressing against water. These are the ocean's lullabies, carrying stories older than our own. Atlantis may be among them, not as a single name or place, but as part of that low and endless song. The sea does not hurry to reveal what it keeps. It is patient in a way that makes our lifetime seem like the brief flicker of a lantern on a dark shore. We search, we map, we dive, but the ocean holds its treasures and its ruins with the same quiet certainty. It knows that time will do its work, whether we are watching or not. And so the legend waits there, unmeasured. Not lost, not found, simply resting in the folds of the deep. Perhaps its towers still stand beneath layers of coral, their edges softened by centuries. Perhaps its streets are open sand now, swept clean by tides. The sea keeps both truths and gives us only enough to keep wondering. In the small hours when the world is hushed and the surface lies still, you might imagine drifting above it. The water is dark, but not cold. There is a comfort in its weight, in the way it cradles you as though it knows every dream that has ever fallen into it. Somewhere far below, stones sleep in patterns that once meant home to someone. Above, the stars mark the slow turning of the night. We do not need to end the story. The ocean never does. It lets each wave carry the past forward, folding it into the present without closing it off. We can do the same. We can let Atlantis remain a question without rushing toward an answer. We can let the water hold it for us. And as the tide breathes in and out, the thought softens, loosens. The horizon blurs. The sound of the waves becomes steady and low, a voice without words telling you that nothing is truly gone, that the sea never forgets. And in that knowing, you drift.